Right, good morning, everybody. Look, we've scheduled this as a 3-hour event. I'm not saying it definitely needs to be 3 hours, but it's important that we get into the granular detail. I'm currently surrounded by screens trying to work out what's going on. This is the first time we've ever done a live event on Teams, so it's all a bit odd because internally we see the screens moving straight away. Externally, I think you're about a minute behind, which is a bit weird. So hopefully everything works okay. Your state is set to do receiving notification urgent messages. Sorry, we're learning this as we go. We've also, I think, enabled the ability for you to record the meeting, but I'm not even sure how you would do that. But if not, anyway, we're going to circulate that afterwards. We think we might have messed up the Q&A settings, so there should be a questions and answers section. But if you find any trouble accessing that, because I think we might have set it up wrong in the configuration, then just send any questions during the piece to export@eori.uk. That's export without an S, export@eori.uk, and we'll pick up the questions from there. So look, one of the reasons we wanted to do today was to get into the sort of granular detail of preparations, because we delayed it to today in the hope that the weekend would have delivered some kind of clarity. But the third weekend on the trot has passed without any further clarity, so that didn't work. And if anything, it got slightly worse in that London, the southeast, is now in tier 4 of COVID preparations, or COVID arrangements, if you like. And also, of course, we've seen this morning that there's been ban on freight movements to France, for example, although we believe that's going to be softening sometime soon. So anyway, without further ado, let's go through what we know and what we're happy to share with people and see if that gives any kind of clarity. We decided to do this as a Teams live event because a normal Teams meeting is limited to the number of attendees. This one already is running at about 350 attendees. But just bear with us, it's our first one. Slightly nervous that things might go wrong. Not nervous about the content, just nervous that we might screw this up somewhere, but let's go for it. We're often asked, like, what's it like at the moment? Can we have this? Can we have that? We get asked a lot of questions. I just want to give you a feeling of what it's like in our world at the moment, and it is literally like pitching a tent in the wind. There's so much change coming along. There's so many things happening at the last minute. Not necessarily earth-shattering changes, but certain functions are still in test mode. We're trying to hook up to things. It's like pitching a tent in the wind. So there's some cases where you just have to bear with us. I know we're getting a lot of pressure at the moment on testing and can you do this, can you do that? Testing at the moment is largely us looking at data and going, yeah, that's good to go. But end to end is probably going to be last minute because some of the systems don't actually go live until the 31st. So it really is a seat of the pants job at the moment. I'm just going to change my screen a minute while you have to bear with me while I talk to myself. Bear with me. I picked up something on Twitter at the weekend, and I just wanted to go over it because it shows the kind of mood of thinking with Conservative MPs at the moment. David Kaczynski is the MP for Shrewsbury, I think. Oh yeah, it says in his name there. And his statement, this is a big statement. Please remember, 92% of British companies do not export to the EU. So it is simply wrong to force EU regulations on 100% of our nation. Over many years, this unaccountable system distorted and hamstrung our free economy just for exports to the EU, worth only 7.9% of GDP. Only, that's a big figure, 7.9. So the two numbers that jump out of there are the 92%. So 92% of businesses don't have any involvement or don't export to the EU. They're not saying that they don't import from the EU. Of course, imports are always a bit softer anyway, because it's your club, it's your rules kind of thing. But this statement was only released at the weekend, whilst everything's going on. This was pre-COVID tier 4, but at least it gives you some idea of, this is a Conservative MP making statements like this. You don't know how much of this is orchestrated and how much of this is just an MP sort of expressing his own views. But there's certainly a feeling that the UK, one, has already left the EU, and we're now just agreeing what the final conditions will be. Whether or not there'll be a deal, we just don't know. None of us know. It's probably 50-50. It seems to ebb and flow quite a lot. And I guess the cynic in me is saying that a lot of it is that there probably will be a deal. Obviously, it won't be as good as today, because today is a free-flowing arrangement. So in order to get to a situation where a deal which is not as good as it is today somehow looks okay, then the first thing you have to do is make the alternative look really bad. So I get the feeling at the moment there's quite a lot of pressure on just making things look particularly terrible, so that when a deal is finally announced, it's really not that bad at all compared to what it would have been. It's still not going to be good. It's still not going to be as good as today, but it's still, potentially not as bad as a full hard Brexit no deal. So statements like this are on the go. We're still talking about fish. We're still talking about level playing fields. Always seems to come down to that sort of situation. Struggle a little bit, I must admit, with the level playing field piece, because it's actually saying that if we can't agree on a level playing field, then we will have duties on day one. If we can agree on a level playing field, then the EU has the right to impose duties if we break the rules. So I don't quite understand is why would you go into a situation where you would have duties on day one, rather than a situation where you would abide by the rules, and it's your decision to decide when you break those rules and therefore have duties imposed. And then, of course, the fish is probably blown out of all proportion, but it's very emotional. It's very close to French hearts, and the Icelandic and the Dutch, apparently. And it's, there's a situation. What I've always said is that if there is any kind of deal that excludes large chunks of fishing overnight to the French fishing industry, then history shows that normally ends up in a Calais blockade. So let's see. So we've got one side arguing about fish, arguing about level playing fields, talking about 92% of the British economy not actually dependent on the EU in any case. So why are we abiding by all these rules? Blah 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 blah. Whilst at the same time, we're looking at a potential for major delays, particularly at the GB export borders. Not so much on imports, because that's controlled by the GB rules, and if they want to be soft, they can be soft. That said, if the flow in is 5 times faster than the flow out, the queue just gets perpetually bigger. If it takes 2 days longer to do a round trip than it would have done pre-Brexit, that's probably going to be costed on the import leg. So you could find that import truckloads are £1,000, £1,200 more expensive than they would have been pre-Brexit, simply because you're stuck in a queue for 2 days trying to leave. Doom and gloom so far. Let's try and cheer this up. What we come across a lot of the time is everybody's just looking at this wall of procedures and a myriad of different regulations that have been thrown forward. Nobody quite knows what's going to happen next. It just all seems like barrier after barrier after barrier. Particularly when if you look at the main flows, what you're seeing is this kind of wall of processes coming towards you, so that everything requires an export, potentially requires a transit document. The safety and security declaration won't seem to go away. I believe actually the EU was offered a waiver on safety and security declarations and turned it down on the basis of that if Brexit is all about controlling our borders, how can we do away with the process that controls our borders? Interesting argument. I don't think they really saw the practicalities of that, though, in the hard light of day. In that there's a lot of situations at the moment where we see traders saying it's okay, we're going to do our own export, or it's okay, we're going to do our own import. But they're not going to do the safety and security declaration, and data is required for that. We will cover later on in this piece what data is required for a safety and security declaration, because it's a question we're asked many, many, many times. And thank you to Tyler for passing me the information so that I could relay it to you today. So what you're looking at is this wall of declarations. Lots of fear, lots of trepidation about how can we cope with all of these documentation. Let's leave it all to the transporter is often the result. However, I think we've got to keep this in perspective. So whilst that is today what looks to be the potential out there, what is actually going to happen on day one is more than half of those are not actually required. So a GB to EU will require an export declaration. The GB to EU is the worst flow. Okay, so GB to EU will require an export declaration, may require a transit, will require safety and security declaration, and will require an import, and so on and so forth. But those relaxations between those two pieces mean that the situation is not pretty, but it's not quite as ugly as it was a minute ago. Now, part of the reason for that has been the phased approach of the GB authorities. And I'm going to walk you through each of these. So number one is GB exports into the EU. There's no relaxation of that process from day one. So right now, from the 1st of January, the EU exports, GB exports to EU are full fat, full flow from day one, as though we are a third country dealing with the EU, and we have to go through all of the processes of that. So right now, no relaxation at all on GB exports to the EU, and I'm including in that the Republic of Ireland. And excuse me when I do often refer to the Republic of Ireland as a different process rather than the EU, and I know they're in the EU, but there is actually a different process in a lot of cases. So quite often I'll refer to ROI separately from the EU. Don't mean anything by it other than by process. Okay, number two, simplified imports into GB. For the first 6 months, the UK has come up with their deferred import process, where you don't need to lodge an import entry for the first 6 months. It's completely up to you. You can, of course, if you want to, but there's enough paperwork to do without choosing to do some that isn't required, particularly as there's a shortage of customs agents such as us. So on day one, the simplified imports into GB means that you don't have to do any declaration if you don't want to. Well, you've got up to 6 months to do the declaration. That's a rolling 6 months. So January is due by the end of June, February by the end of July, March by the end of August, so on and so forth. The slight complication in the middle of that is that your quarterly VAT return will still be due during that period, and you may have to make estimated returns because you don't yet have the full import entry details. That's covered by the border operating model. They're well aware that's going to happen. I think you've got to decide what's more important to you. Is it the accuracy of your VAT return, where the government have already said they're happy for you to make estimates, or is it truck stuck at borders? Completely your choice, whether the supply chain runs the business or the administration runs the business. Your shout. Number three, SPS. We refer to SPS quite a lot. It's sanitary, phytosanitary, better known as health certificates. On day one, the GB doesn't require, apart from certain controlled goods, but not very many, does not require health certificates at all from day one, at least until April. From April, health certificates are required, but there'll be no border inspection process. It's just a paperwork process. So health certificates will be needed from April, from the 1st of April. And IPAFs, which is the UK equivalent of traces, will also be required. We cover that in more detail shortly. After April, it is IPAFs and health certificates. Then from July, we're then down to physical border inspections, which will be slightly inland from the borders, just due to space constraints. But they're certainly scheduled to have full border control posts. So nothing for the first 3 months, paperwork for the next 3 months, physical checks thereafter. And number four, the safety and security declaration, the waiver that we turned down. Whilst the EU require it from day one because it's a requirement from imports from third countries, the UK system is more relaxed and has actually said, look, we are going to have safety and security declarations, but not for the first 6 months. So from January to the end of June, there is no requirement for a safety and security declaration into the UK. Thereafter, there will be. So going back to number 2 for a minute, there's deferred entry scheme, which is this 6 months. You don't have to take 6 months, but what it does give you is whether you take 2 days or 6 months, the main purpose of that process is to remove the customs paperwork from the flow of the goods. So you're not putting any pressure on the border. You're actually just dealing with the paperwork the next day. I mean, it can be the next day, it can be the next month, it can be 3 months later. But the most important part of that is it isn't at the frontier. Okay, because it's, why put pressure on that part when you don't really need to. Okay, so and that's a process known as CFSP entry and declarants records. Catchy title. So customs freight simplified procedure is an established procedure, goes back to 1993, I think. Actually, it might be 1998. I did see it the other day. And entry and declarants records is the process where the frontier declaration is the function of the trader entering the goods into their records. So they create a record in their own system, and that therefore creates a requirement for a customs declaration, an import declaration, to finish the job, really. Somebody's often said to me is, what about if I use my EORI number at the frontier to use entry and declarants records, then a driver will suddenly overhear that I've used that one, and now everybody will be on my EORI number, and I'll be responsible for every import into GB. Look, if somebody gets hold of your EORI number and crosses the border on entry and declarants records, unless they break into your office, open your computer system and put it on your ledger, you're still not liable. It's not the frontier that is important here, it's the entry in declarants records. The clue is in the name. Okay, so what that means is everybody's now rushing around frantically saying, I need entry and declarants records approval. I need CFSP, I need it now. We've had 1 million people coming on to us saying, I need the declaration, I need it. You've already got it, basically. The situation right now is that you've got it, it's kind of set up that you already have entry and declarants records approval. Just you haven't yet got entry and declarants records approval. So the kind of default, if you choose to use it, is that you cross the frontier with EIDR approval. You then have up to 6 months to obtain EIDR approval and submit your supplementary declarations. Or if you're unable to obtain EIDR approval in that period, to employ a customs intermediary who will do the supplementary declarations on your behalf. Okay, so the actual default is you've already got EIDR if you choose to have it. If you don't choose to have it, then the supplementary declaration can be closed off by an intermediary acting on your behalf, which is similar to entry and declarants records anyway. Okay. What more can I say about that? You already have it. It's a bit like TSP was, if you can remember, a year or so ago. The other one that comes up a lot is tariffs, obviously. As we know, before, when the UK was facing the cliff edge, they came up with a temporary no-deal tariff, which actually pretty much removed tariffs on just about everything. There's 15,000 commodity codes, and it leveled off as only 400 of them had any kind of duty rate at all. I can't remember actually even saying that, whether I'm talking about 8-digit or 10-digit lines, but I think it was 10-digit. That hasn't happened yet. Now that either means that the negotiations are ongoing and there's a possibility of a deal. It could still happen. Like if we end up with a no deal situation, the UK might suddenly drop into a reduced tariff. They might not. We really just don't know. It was right of them to cancel the no deal temporary tariff before, because you couldn't go into a negotiation with the EU having already removed 90% of your tariffs. So it doesn't make any sense. You had to level it up. So right now, as on day one, tariffs will be applied in both directions. In the EU, 2,000 commodities are tariff free anyway, even from a third country. And the UK has rationalised the UK tariff and actually brought and taken away, I think they had a threshold of around about 2%, where they said if the tariff was anything less than 2%, they labelled it as a nuisance tariff and removed it. Excuse me, sipping of water. So there's 4,000 commodity codes into the UK which are duty free anyway, and there's 2,000 which are duty free into the EU. They're not the products that you and I deal in. So, you know, if duties are coming, they're going to come with quite a bang. You need to be able to cover them one way or another. That said, the smart money is that there will be some form of a deal. Whether or not that's concluded by the 1st of January is unknown. Whether or not it's agreed and then retrospectively ratified, again unknown. But both sides want to do a deal, and it's just a matter of them shifting their red lines. Of course, as the clock ticks, the red lines start to move quite a bit. So hopefully they get into a situation where they can come up with some sort of compromise. Isn't that how the world goes around? Everything's a compromise at the end of the day. So tariffs are coming until they're not, you know, and this makes life really difficult when people start to plan IPR, OPR for inward processing relief or outward processing relief. Do I need a bonded warehouse? Do I need to control the goods? Is there potential for double duty? Is there this? Is there that? All of that goes away with a stroke of a pen when somebody says that, look, there's a deal done and there isn't any duty. Now, and it literally can be the stroke of a pen. I mean, I remember when the UK no deal tariff, temporary no deal tariff came out. It was kind of an overnight thing. It's like, by the way, this is our new tariff, and everyone had to quickly adjust. So expect some last minute changes, which might also blow out of the water some of the proposals you put in place. For example, if you've got bonded warehousing for one reason or another, you can't put goods into a bonded warehouse for VAT only. You can only put them in for duty. So if the duty is removed, but you were still planning to use a bonded warehouse, you might have to relook at that authorization, because if it's a VAT only bond, there's no such thing. So we just got to see how these things develop. Can't believe I'm saying this on the 10 days to go and Christmas. We're saying we need to see how things develop, but that's what we are saying. Duties are one thing. How am I going to pay them is the other. So in the UK, it's possible to have a duty deferment account, which allows you a sort of set credit limit per month against which you can put the liabilities on import entries, and then that liability is collected on the 15th day of the following month, unless it's excise duty, in which case it's twice a month. But standard on duty is the 15th of the following month. Now, normally to have a duty deferment account, you need a customs comprehensive guarantee, which is backed by a bank, which is for double the amount of duty liability you would imagine in any one month, because the payment is collected on the 15th of the second month. The credit guarantee, if you like, needs to cover 2 months worth of trade, because of course in the first 14 days of month 2 you might ramp up another month's worth, and therefore HMRC would be exposed for 2 months worth of liability. The good news is they've said in the UK, and I'm pretty sure this is for UK established companies only. I'll double check and put that out on the chat at some stage. Is that you can have a duty deferment account in the UK without a comprehensive guarantee, i.e. unsecured, for up to £10,000 per month, providing you have sufficient financial status to do that. If you want more than £10,000 a month, you can apply for it still with a waiver if your financial status is sufficient. If your financial status isn't sufficient or is up to a certain limit, anything over and above that would still require a customs comprehensive guarantee. Okay, so it's a lot easier to get a deferment account in the UK, particularly as the waivers are in a lot of cases 100%. The TAN account is the Irish equivalent of a deferment account, and we love it, to be fair, because I think it's really straightforward and clear. Most customs agents in Europe like duty deferment accounts because it's a means of paying duty on behalf of traders that don't ship very often, for example, and aren't large enough to have their own duty deferment accounts, and therefore the trader can handle the money on their behalf, charge an admin fee, charge a sort of cash handling fee, blah, blah, blah. And it can be quite a good source of income over and above the documentation charges. Ireland has never really worked that way, or it does a bit, but not very much. They've always had this TAN account, which is the Irish deferment account, where you can actually have an account backed by a customs comprehensive guarantee, as you would in the UK. But you can also have a situation where if you've got a VAT number and an EORI number in Ireland, you can load the money to your EORI account as like a prepaid deferment account, if you like. Now that works really well in that means we don't have to handle the cash. Excuse me. You could just have a situation where the trader is loading their EORI account, and then we're referencing that EORI account on the import entry. The trader can keep the money topped up as much as they want. It's a prepaid duty deferment account, really. So, and then I just couldn't resist putting this. Oh, Ben's trying to plug his computer in. Yeah, okay. I realised you were low on power. We've got so many screens surrounding me here. I couldn't resist putting this image up because we did have originally on this image pictures of pound notes and euros. But then I came across this one again at the weekend when I was going through the file. And this was a suggestion for the Brexit commemorative coin at one point. So I just thought I'd lighten the mood a little bit by having that on there. It is what it is. Okay, let's go through, before we go through the sort of granular detail of what is required in both directions, let's just go over some of the rules first. And these are rules that need to be established before we can move forward. So we still hear today a lot of traders saying, oh, let's hope there's a trade deal and we won't have any of this paperwork. I mean, I can't believe we're still hearing that despite the media coverage, despite everything, we still hear that as a response. It's not an option. No matter what happens, there is paperwork. There has to be. There isn't a free trade deal in the world that gets away with that. The only thing that got away with paperwork before was the single market and most importantly, centralized VAT. So why do we need paperwork? First of all, we will be trading under WTO rules. Whether we have a deal or don't have a deal, we will be trading under WTO rules. The WTO most favored nation, MFN rules are very important in that what happens under WTO MFN is that if you don't have a deal with a particular trading partner, you can't have a special arrangement with that trading partner unless you make that arrangement available to every other trading partner that you also don't have a deal with. Does that make sense? So if the UK, for example, if the EU, for example, turned around to us and said, look, I know you're having a hard time, blah, blah, blah. We're gonna give up on the heat treated pallets idea. We don't really need them. Then under WTO rules, they have to give up on that process for everybody from everywhere in the world. So there's a lot of situations here where the EU are covered in the British media by being, those nasty people from Brussels, but they're not particularly being intransigent. They're just following the WTO rules. Is that, they can't say to us, well, look, do you know what, I know we haven't got a deal, but we're not going to charge you any duties. They can't do that under WTO unless they also agree to not charge duties to anybody else that they equally don't have a deal with. So it's really not as straightforward as it sounds. And it's the cornerstone of everything. I mean, page 1 of the WTO rulebook is about MFN, is about most favored nation, which is a kind of a contradiction in terms because it's actually saying you can't have a most favored nation. Everybody has to be treated the same, and whatever deal you do for one, you must do for all, unless it's a specific trade deal. Okay. So you'll often see a situation as well in the WTO where you've got the one I hear a lot actually is the Wto Tariff. I don't hear it quite so much now, but I used to hear a lot of consultants out there saying, well, of course, we're going to have to use the WTO tariff. But there's no such thing. The WTO is not the rule maker. It's or is not the arbiter of all of this. They just set the rules and you follow that framework of rules. So there is a WTO tariff. Every member of the WTO has their own tariff. And there's 168 member countries of the WTO. Some have got group tariffs, such as the EU, but each of them has their own tariff. And within that tariff, they will have binding rates, which is the maximum they will charge on that product being imported, and applied rates, which is the amount they will charge for those products being imported in the event of there not being a deal with that territory. So the reason why you have binding and applied is so that the foreign production can scale up, knowing it will never be as bad as 10%, but right now it's only 5%. So there's always the binding will always be the maximum that it can be. The applied is what it's going to be. And then, of course, if there's a free trade deal sitting underneath that, then there's a relaxation still further. Okay. The other one is that a free trade agreement, I mean, be careful what you wish for here. Whilst it will remove duties, it will bring a swathe of paperwork with it, is that every free trade agreement has qualifying criteria. And just because we've done a deal with the EU doesn't suddenly now mean we've got this, everything's gone back to as it was before. Everything just flows freely until there's a problem. By leaving the EU and leaving the customs processes of the EU, we've gone into a situation where everything is guilty until proven innocent. Whereas, of course, in free-flowing Brexit, everything's the opposite way around. It's been innocent until somebody decides they don't like the look of it and pulls it over. So an FTA has qualifying criteria, and that will be rules of origin. Rules of origin is starting to surface a little bit now. Is that, what are the qualifying rules of origin? There are two, without going into great detail on rules of origin, because there is no black on white on rules of origin. There are two basic rules. One is that the origin of the product is decided by its largest proportion, which is fine. And the other one is the origin of the product is decided by its last significant process. Completely different meaning. And I was talking to one client who had was importing beef burgers from Germany. So they'd look like German beef burgers, but the beef was Argentinian. So under the largest proportion, they would be Argentinian, and under the last significant process, they'd clearly be German. So this is a massive set of rules that need to be adopted. And this is why you have to think that if there is some kind of trade deal, then it almost has to come with an implementation period, because you can't suddenly on the 28th, and my money's on the 28th, on the 28th of December saying, okay, guys, good news, we've got a deal. And these are the rules, and expect everybody to apply those 4 days later. I mean, it's impossible. So you'd have to think that there would be some softening, some phasing in. I have to say the UK version of phasing in is my preference, in that paperwork flows but is disconnected from the movement of the freight, and then gradually over 6 months is reconnected to the actual physical movement of the goods. We've mentioned a lot about the fiscal movement of the goods and the physical movement of the goods. Well, what UK have done in that 6 months, more out of necessity really, have taken that first 6 months and actually removed, detached the fiscal element from the physical element, and gradually over the 6 months they're coming back together again. That would be a great solution. Whether or not it's one the EU would take up, bearing in mind the UK kind of suggested it. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. Who knows? Just have a quick look at. Sorry, bear with me 2 minutes. And VAT. You can't forget VAT, and it's often forgotten. The often forgotten VAT. There's no free trade agreement in the world that cancels VAT. VAT is like a domestic sales tax. It's already very difficult to cover, even in the EU, cross-border VAT movements. And I think I read a report, I can't remember the exact figure, but I know it's stunningly high, that the EU published a report recently about what they refer to as the Vat Gap, which is the amount of VAT which should have been collected but wasn't collected for one reason or another on intra-EU trade. And it was a figure somewhere near 100 billion euros a year. There's two figures in my head, one's 70 billion and one's 170 billion. So let's go with 100. Either way, it's massive. So you can't suddenly have a situation where the UK leaves the EU and VAT just isn't an issue. Well, it is. It changes completely. When you're exporting goods, they're zero rated. Whereas today you would ship goods from France to GB, and you would quote the VAT number of the receiver in GB, and they'd be responsible for accounting for the VAT. You've just got to prove that they got there. You've also got to make sure that the VAT number is valid. Okay, that all stops in Brexit. With Brexit, you've got a border. You're going to leave one frontier zero rated for VAT because they're leaving that customs territory, and then you have to account for that VAT as a positive transaction on the other side of the fence. So they're the three reasons: WTO rules, and how do you control the most favoured nation piece? The FTA has qualifying criteria, and VAT. And VAT is a big piece. Which drives the next piece into Incoterms. Now we've got this front and centre whereas most advice and guidance I've seen, it sort of has a bit of a supporting role, but is not particularly front and center. I think in the border operating model of 206 pages was the initial version. I think it was about page 100 before Incoterms got a look in. To my mind, it is position A. It's about as much as when you used to buy DVDs and videos before Netflix and what have you, and streaming generally. The first question you were asked is, what language would you like this in? And if you accidentally press German and you don't speak German, you frantically were trying to turn it around so that you could understand what you were watching. It's as important as that. The Incoterms sets the flow of the transaction. And if you don't understand Incoterms, many are catching up with it now and understanding it. And 2 years ago, people weren't referring to, is it DAP, is it FCA? Those conversations weren't taking place. Now they're pretty common, but if you're not having those conversations, then you need to. So what are the key elements? Well, DDP is one of the major ones. And DDP kind of is almost a default position, is that there's, the free flowing of goods at the moment means there's a large proportion of them that are costed on a delivered basis. So you want to supply your goods. So I managed to secure a buyer in Paris, and therefore I'm going to send my goods to that buyer. And to make his life a bit easier, because I want him to buy more of my products, I'm going to deliver them to the door. Okay. So that becomes DDP, or delivered. Lazily, it becomes DDP because, of course, there are no processes. Therefore, it's delivered duty paid, but there's no duty, so it's just DDP. It's actually delivered. Once you start to bring the processes in, such as import declaration, import duty, and importantly, import VAT, under DDP conditions, they become the responsibility of the seller, not the buyer. DDP is essentially a domestic supply. Okay, so this is a major factor that's confusing a lot of people. Still to this day, it's confusing a lot of people. So if you're selling goods DDP, you need the means to be able to arrange the import declaration in the destination country. You need the method of payment for the import duty in the destination country. And most importantly, you need to be able to account for the VAT in the destination country by having a VAT number in the destination country. I read a while ago, actually, somebody saying, said, you can clear goods in France with a Dutch EORI number. Yeah, you can, but it should have a French VAT number underneath it. Otherwise, you're clearing the goods in one member state and paying the VAT, but of course, you've got no mechanism of reclaiming that VAT as an input. Or indeed charging it on because you're not VAT registered. So really got to consider whether DDP is the right choice, but we're flagging it here and we come up with some solutions in a moment. Well, actually right now, one of the ones we've come up with is what we lovingly refer to as DDP Lite. Now, always saying that in a DDP environment, the top line, the seller is also the importer. And they would create a VAT identity in the destination country, accept the duty charges, accept the documentation charges, accept the VAT, and then charge their customer in that territory as a domestic VATable supply. That's fine. So either way, the buyer will end up with the VAT. So we dropped it down into something that is quite common in the UK and less so in mainland Europe, which is kind of DDP Lite. This doesn't really exist as a term, but the Incoterms are not set in stone. They're the basis of a commercial agreement. And it's also important to remember that they are commercial agreements, not customs agreement. Inco is short for international commercial. Okay? So DDP Lite says that the buyer is actually willing to become the importer. He's willing to account for the VAT at the point of importation because they're going to account for the VAT in any case at some stage. So the buyer becomes responsible for the VAT and the agent representing the seller will actually arrange the import declaration, arrange the payment of import duty in the destination country and charge it back to the seller, to the exporter. So in true DDP, the seller is everything. In DDP Lite, the seller is is responsible for the export declaration. The buyer is responsible for the import declaration, but the agent acting on behalf of both parties will actually charge the import duty and the import declaration charge back to the seller because it's delivered. Whew. The polar opposite of DDP, which is like a domestic supply, is ex-works. Ex-works is also one that we hear quite a lot with people say, well, look, we buy ex-works, it's a lot easier, we arrange transport, we're very powerful, we can get trucks cheaper. Ex-works is a similar problem. You need to have a conversation with your supplier because in ex-works environment, bearing in mind we now want to zero rate the goods for VAT, therefore because it's leaving that customs territory. Well, in an ex-works environment, it's not really an export. It's somebody selling their goods from the back door. Therefore, it's not particularly an export, and it's not particularly been packed for export or ready for export. So in that situation, ex-works is actually also a domestic supply, and your seller might not be quite so keen to zero rate the product because they're not controlling the customs process. And if they're not willing to zero rate the product for export, you're going to need a VAT number in the country of purchase so that you can handle the VAT nationally, so that you can then buy the goods plus VAT, ship the goods minus VAT as an export, and recover the VAT as part of your normal VAT return. So full-blown DDP is sort of top right, full-blown ex-works is bottom left, and both to be avoided if possible. And HubSpot's just popped up for some reason. Anyway, what's the alternative? Well, come one in from each of those, where ex-works is the extreme of the buyer having to do everything. FCA is one step in, where the seller has to sort of get the goods ready for export. And that's it, that's all they have to do. And DAP is very, very similar in that in both FCA and DAP, the seller is the exporter, the buyer is the importer responsible for import declaration, import duty, import VAT, and so on and so forth. The only difference is with FCA and DAP is the actual payment of freight charges. So in FCA, the buyer is paying the freight charges, and in DAP, the seller is paying the freight charges up to delivery. Okay. But DAP is not actually quite as good as it sounds in many cases, because who's paying the duty? Who's actually, if there is duty to be paid, who's paying that duty? Now, from a transporter's point of view, where you might be collecting goods from Brussels and delivering them to London, and then your customer is in Brussels and it's a delivered price, that's absolutely fine. That's always been the case. And your customer in Brussels says, well, actually, this is a DAP. We're still fine. We're still good to go. Only problem now is the address in London, which was previously just a delivery address, is now an importer. And if they don't have the means to arrange the import declaration and pay the import duty, then potentially that monkey could be on your back. Not so much in GB because of the relaxed importation system, particularly for the first 6 months. But if you were doing DAP into mainland Europe, you suddenly do have a situation where the VAT is, or the duty and potentially VAT in some territories, becomes payable at importation, and the buyer of the goods wasn't aware of his obligations and therefore has not arranged the funds. And of course, then what happens is your customer, who is doing a DAP movement, is talking to you as the transporter saying, well, why have you done this? Why aren't you delivering to my friend? He's my friend. He's been my friend for years. He's the godfather of my eldest, blah, blah, blah. And you'll get the blame as the transporter. So it's important to make sure that's covered off. Of course, what will happen is you're sitting there saying that the reason why I can't deliver those goods in Brussels is there's £10,000 worth of duty, and the importer hasn't made any arrangements because he didn't really know he was the importer. And of course, your customer will say, that's fine, I'll pay it. Flipping him into DDP. Because suddenly now he's saying, well, I'll take care of everything. And you go, okay, if you want to take care of everything, then you also have to take care of everything, including the VAT at destination, which means a DAP without the funds secured can quite often drop into DDP light, which is absolutely fine. And this is why we think DDP light needs to get a bit more attention. Excuse me, supping away. It's vodka, you know. The main thing about this is to understand what these complications are. I mean, you're basically down to the rule of 4. DDP and ex-works should be avoided if possible. DDP and what can be used is FCA, DAP, or DDP Light, but that requires a conversation. All of it requires a conversation. You can't sit there and unilaterally decide what the terms are without agreement with between the buyer and seller. So going back to my point again is that Incoterms is international commercial terms. You need to have a conversation. You need to make sure that everybody is aware of what their responsibilities are in the chain. Now we've seen that even at the 11th hour, where suddenly suppliers in Europe have actually said, I'm not as ready as I thought I was. I can't do the export declaration. I thought you were doing it. And there's all that kind of, well, I thought it was FCA, I thought it was X-Works, and the devil's in the detail when it comes to this sort of stage. And you run the risk of product not being able to move because the documentation has not been done. So let's just run back to DDP a minute. DDP exports from GB. This is not the case with the Republic of Ireland, really, because the Republic of Ireland, the good thing about the Republic of Ireland is when you ship to the Republic of Ireland, you're going to the Republic of Ireland. The problem when you ship to mainland Europe is you're going to which member state again? So suddenly you have a situation where you've got a GB exporter who is selling the goods on DDP terms because he's already disadvantaged by the fact there's now duty to be paid. He doesn't want to lose the customer. The customer in Italy, Germany and France, they didn't vote for Brexit. They didn't want any of this. They just want the product. The UK supplier doesn't want to lose his competitive edge or his sale. So he said, well, look, okay, look, I'll sort everything out and I'll just deliver as normal. This isn't this isn't a problem of your making. I'll get everything cleared up before I ship the goods to you, and you won't see any difference really. There might be half a day delay. So that kind of flips into a DDP environment. However, that's really problematic in that a GB supplier on DDP terms, whilst it's an honourable thing to do to try and remove the problem, is suddenly now if they're supplying into France, they're going to have to pay VAT on arrival or account for VAT on arrival, and therefore they need a VAT number in France. If they're shipping to Italy via France, they're going to need a transit document to get through France in order to pass to Italy, uncleared, because you're not clearing at the initial frontier. And again, you need another VAT number in Italy and the payment of VAT at importation. I believe it's not postponed accounting in Italy, it's payment at the door. And that's another 22%. So, but also fiscal representation or VAT numbers, and you're starting to ramp up a lot of cost here. And the same for Germany. Unless you're shipping directly to Germany through Cuxhaven or whatever, you're going to need a transit document to pass through. It might be France, Belgium, Holland into Germany. So you need a transit for that, and the agent will ask you probably for a deposit for that transit to prove that the goods have got to their final destination. And again, another VAT number. And I think on Germany, it's not postponed accounting either. I think it's possible to have postponed VAT accounting, but it's not 100%. It's not widespread. So what's the solution? Well, the solution which comes up quite a lot is fiscal representation, and it's quite common for agents, particularly in Holland, which of course has a lot of exposure to rest of world trade through Europort. There's a very mature system on fiscal representation. France less so, but that's only because of the necessity really, that needs must and all that lot, and in Holland needs must, and in France maybe not quite so much. So what is the option with French with fiscal representation, and why should you look at France over and above everybody else first? Well, really, it's because of the predominance of Eurotunnel and Dover. So we're talking about freight in trucks here, subject to COVID bans and what have you. But if the freight is in a truck, the truck will tend to gravitate towards Eurotunnel and Dover. The numbers bear that out. I mean, it's not rocket science. So the most common denominator the most common denominator in terms of your first touch point into mainland Europe would be France. So, excuse the bottle keeps popping, sorry. So therefore it would make sense to have the fiscal representation in the first touch point in France. Now what that would mean is that you would have a VAT representative in France, a fiscal representative, so that you could actually ship everything to Europe to your virtual self in France, and then supply from there as though you were French. So you would have a DDP export from GB to your, well, it's actually a DAP export from GP to your French identity covered by fiscal representation. duty is paid, VAT is accounted for, and then the movement from your French virtual identity, now that's DDP. It's DDP from France to Italy, for example, plus the VAT is now intra-EU reverse charge. So I've seen this touted before as like have fiscal rep and trade VAT free. It's not quite right, not quite the right terminology, but I get the point. Is that if you have fiscal representation, you have the VAT in France isn't paid for at importation, it's accounted for. You then charge your customer in Italy as you would today with a reverse charge movement quoting their VAT number. Germany would be the same. There's no need for any transit documentation. It's all it's not all too easy, but it's a very good mitigation in terms of if you take whereas the box on the left had multiple VAT registrations, multiple fiscal reps, payment of some VAT at importation, payment of some through the VAT return system. The one on the right is just saying, well, look, okay, look, I have GB Exporter Calais Limited. I have a fiscal representative who's going to look after everything for me, and the goods are all shipped to my virtual self in Calais and then distributed from there as though Brexit never happened. You've still got the duty, can't do much about that, but you've made a lot of the VAT and process go away, and you've also consolidated the fiscal elements. Okay, your only problem is indirect representation in most cases. Let's cover that off quickly because direct and indirect comes up quite a lot and is often also misunderstood. Actually, because its meaning is almost the opposite of its phrase. So direct representation by a broker on behalf of an importer means that the broker is acting on behalf and in good faith on behalf of the importer who is established in the customs territory of the import declaration. Established means a legal entity in this case. So if the importer is established in the customs territory where the declaration has been made, and so too is the declarant, the agent, then the agent can act as a direct representative, and they are only liable for any errors that they might make on that customs entry, putting dollars instead of euros, for example, that type of thing. But they're not liable for the debt created by that entry. If, however, the importer is not established in the country of importation, as in the case of like fiscal representative, then the agent has to act as an indirect representative and becomes jointly and severally liable for any customs debt on that declaration, not in perpetuity and not for every import that trade has ever done, just for that declaration. Now, what does that mean in real terms? Well, there was a case that's often used as an example in Ireland where a trader was importing garlic and declaring it as onions. The duty rate on onions is something like 2%, and the duty rate on garlic is something like 232%. So the trader was happily doing this, telling the broker that these are onions, more onions, another trailer full of onions. The broker was doing everything that they were told to do with the information that was presented to them. Bearing in mind, we often don't see the goods. And it all came out in the wash about a year later when customs realised that this was actually garlic and the duty was massively underpaid. Trader had gone missing at that point, and therefore under the indirect representation process, customs can go to the broker for the money. Okay, so you can understand that indirect representation is not somewhere where a broker particularly wants to be. There's a lot of cases where we have to do it, and we have a situation where we work for an Irish exporter, and we do the export declaration using our Irish entity, and we are therefore acting as the exporter on a direct basis. And then the goods cross the Irish Sea, come to GB as a delivered duty paid movement, so that the Irish exporter now has an identity in GB but not a legal entity. And now having done the export as a direct rep, we're now doing the import as an indirect rep. But it's a decision we made because we're in the food business, and that seems to be a good place to be. Otherwise, we can't keep everything moving. But if you look at the British International Freight Association terms and conditions, I think it's pretty much one of the first clauses is that a member will only act as a direct representative. So don't just assume that because you found an agent that the agent is willing to act on your behalf. It needs to be clear to them whether they're acting as a direct or indirect rep. and breathe. Before we go on to the essentials, I might just take a minute break before I go on to the essentials. Let's go into the let's look at the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is still the pallets. Right now you need ISPM heat treated pallets in both directions, GB to EU and EU to GB. Look, I don't think GB particularly want them, but their initial reaction was there's a shortage of these type of pallets, therefore if our exporters can't get them, let's ask for them anyway, and that will therefore create a pool. Not really understanding how supply chain works, so it tends to be Euro pallets going out and UK pallets coming in. So of course having a heat treated pool is not necessarily the right thing to do. I mean, most pallets coming in tend to be coming into UK, particularly for UK retail, tend to be UK size pallets, unless it's for the Audis and Lidls, for example, that tend to work more in euros. But right now, that's the rule. It is a heat treated pallet on day one in both directions. If there's any kind of deal, that one's likely to be bedded straight away and be parked. But right now, that's where it sits. Okay, now we're going to move on to what the essentials are. We're going to get a little bit granular here. So I'm just looking at how many people we've got attending. I'm just going to let you sit on that one for a minute. I'm going to take a 2-minute break, actually a 5-minute break, and then we'll move on to the essentials. And we're back in the room with a cup of coffee. Sorry, it seems like we did mess up the Q&A, but we are seeing some questions coming through on export@eori.uk, and the team is starting to pick those up. We won't get through them all during this session, but we will pick them up and follow them up. Plus, you've all now realised there's another email address you can get us on, because everything else was getting clogged up. But we will pick that up, don't worry. We'll try and cover some of them off now. One I just saw a minute ago, which I thought was quite interesting. Is everything, just 2 seconds, just is that, are we online like we should be? Yeah, okay, it's all right. There's a minute delay on the screen, so it's really confusing this end. It's just the way Teams works. That's okay. One of the questions just came in, and it was quite relevant because of Incoterms that we were just talking about, is that what Incoterms would I show if I'm supplying DDP? I would say not DDP. Is that when if you're supplying, let's take it for that you're from Ireland and you're supplying somebody in Manchester, but you're doing that on DDP conditions. So in actual fact, you're supplying from Dublin to your virtual self in the UK as a DAP. You're then paying the duty at importation and supplying your customer in Manchester from your virtual self in the UK as DDP. You're not actually supplying, unless you're doing things slightly differently, you're not actually supplying yourself in Ireland to your virtual self in GB as DDP. Because the duty hasn't been paid, the duty is probably not included in the price. It's just a cost you're taking. It could be argued that it's included in the price, but just be aware that when you're doing a customs entry and the value is shown as DDP, that in order to arrive at the value for duty, we first have to take off the freight charges and the duty itself. So if the consignment is DDP, it's telling the system that the duty is included in the price of the goods, and therefore to include the duty, we must to calculate the duty, we must first remove it from the value that includes the duty in order to arrive at a value for duty. Sorry, a bit complicated that, but you get what I mean. It's a bit like having a VAT inclusive price. In order to work out what the VAT is, you first got to take the VAT off, and then you end up with a net price that you can then calculate the VAT and put it back on again. It's that kind of process. Of course, you may mean that, but in most cases, most people don't mean that. They just mean that they're supplying the customer with the same products that they supplied before, only now they're kind of sucking up the duty. I guess it could also be argued, though, that if you are supplying the goods at the same price as before and there is duty now payable, that the value of the product has been reduced by the duty figure, therefore the duty is included, because the decision you have to make, if you show DDP, just be aware that we will remove the duty from the value for duty before calculating the duty. And that could end up with a knock on your door in 3 years' time from some authority somewhere saying, you've underpaid duty for 3 years, where's my money? Just so you're aware. Oh, doom and gloom today, aren't I? Sorry, we're at the granular level, aren't we? So I just need to change my screen so I can see my slides. Hopefully you're not seeing what I'm doing. Not that there's anything wrong with what I'm doing. Good. Now, what we want to do is get into the granular details. So buckle up. We're going to go through one by one now. This is probably the heaviest slide on here. I actually know the transit one's a bit of a doozy as well, actually. But let's go through each of these one by one. What we're trying to do here is go through what are the component parts. Let me make sure I've not muted myself for a minute. Hold on a second. I could be talking to myself for ages. Oh, okay. You sure I haven't? Yes, I haven't. Okay. Yes, I haven't. Is that a double negative? Right, what we want to do now is go through look, you will never need all of this pack, although there are some where you need most of them, but let's make sure that you know what each of those components are. We often refer to Brexit process flows as being like a circuit, that if you get all the right wires in all the right order, oh sorry, my screen's jumping all over the place, all the right wires in all the right order, then when you flick the switch, the light comes on. But if you get the wires in the wrong order, or you miss a wire altogether, you flick the switch and nothing happens, the light doesn't come on. So let's first of all understand what all of the wires are, if I'm not pushing a metaphor to its extreme. Okay, so number one on the pack is the EAD, the export declaration. This is required to support VAT zero rated invoice. An export declaration is raised from one EORI number to another EORI number. We're often asked as well in Northern Ireland, for example, or in Ireland, or Island of Ireland really, is that if I've got products that I manufacture in the Republic of Ireland, but I store in Northern Ireland and then I export it to GB, where's it come from? And Ireland, it's come from the Republic of Ireland. It just so happened to be stored in Northern Ireland. But when you're actually raising the export declaration, who's the exporter is the question. Who's zero rating the transaction? Who's charging the customer? So if you're zero rating the transaction, you require an EAD. And it should be from the EORI number of the exporter who is zero rating the goods to the EORI number of the importer who is responsible for the import VAT on those goods. See what I mean? All back to VAT. So that's the EAD. Quite a simple document, but nonetheless a really important one and has to be done first. Well, it doesn't have to be done first, but it's the initial move in the chain, really. The EXS, the Exit Safety and Security Declaration, not talked about much. Everyone talks about ENS, the Entry Safety and Security Declaration. Reason being is the EXS on the whole is attached to the EAD and is kind of a conjoined process. So if you're raising an EAD, you're also raising an EXS. There will be times when you're raising an EXS on its own, but that's pretty rare. Okay. TAD is in the world of acronyms. Let's move down to TAD. TAD is the transit document, the transit accompanying document, where EAD is the export accompanying document. TAD is the transit accompanying document. It allows the goods to move through a frontier uncleared. For example, between France and Ireland via GB. So they're passing through another customs territory uncleared. Or GB to Germany via France. They want to pass through France, Belgium and Holland in order to get there. So they need a transit to pass through the frontier uncleared. Okay, it's one of the only documents aside from health certificates that has to accompany the goods. So if you have a transit document, that has to be a printed document and it has to go with the goods. The other thing worth noting here is where was I? The EAD tends to be at consignment level, and the TAD, the transit, can be at consignment level, but is often at load level. For example, you might have 10 consignments going from one groupage hub to another groupage hub, and typically you would raise 10 export declarations. However, you would only raise one transit declaration from hub to hub. So try to think as much as possible that the EAD is consignment and the TAD is load level. GVMS, the Goods Vehicle Movement Service. This is the kind of UK travel wallet that is this sort of depository for repository. I don't know the right word there. Where you put MRNs, somewhere to keep your MRNs. It's like a travel wallet, really. So rather than the driver arriving at Dover with 200 MRNs and all the paperwork that goes with that, you can just put everything in the GVMS, which creates a GMR, a goods movement record, and the driver then reports to the port of export with the GMR. And within that GMR are all the MRNs relevant to that truck. Okay, the GVMS is unlikely to be ready on day one, except for transit movements and Northern Ireland, because it's an essential part of the GBNI flow. So we'll come to that though in more detail when we're going to go granular route by route on all of this. But it's first of all important that you understand the acronyms and what each their functions are. The PBN is pre-boarding notification. We're concentrating first of all on UK Ireland. We will move to mainland Europe in a minute, but we're going to do UK Ireland first. So the PBN is the pre-boarding notification, very, very similar to the GVMS. It's somewhere to put the MRNs so that you just end up with a single barcode or a single QR code, which can be identified at check-in. Now that's obviously really important because, of course, the dead of night, you're rolling into Holyhead at 10 o'clock at night. It's blowing a hoolie, it's dark, it's wet, it's horrible. You open your cab door and 300 MRNs go flying towards Lidl. That obviously can't happen. So this system is all a matter of just packing that ready to present to the port in a much more orderly fashion. So the GVMS and PBN are pretty similar. When we look at mainland Europe, we'll also look at port-based, RxC port, SI Brexit, which is the logistics envelope, and so on and so forth. Breathe. ENS, the dreaded ENS. This one's giving more grief than anywhere. The ENS is the Entry Safety and Security Declaration, also known as the ICS system. That's a fairly high level sort of headline notification of what's on the truck at consignment level, not at load level. Okay, so every consignment requires an ENS declaration. So typically you would have every export would have an MRN, every import would have an MRN or an entry number at consignment level, and every consignment would have a safety and security declaration. Excuse me. It's proving to be more troublesome than it should be. We've got a slide later on in here where we talk about what data do you actually require for the ENS. So I won't dwell on it too much here, but it is a challenge. It's definitely more of a challenge than you would think. Where it's also a very big challenge is where you're a transporter, but the trader is saying, look, I'm doing my own export, or I'm doing my own import, or I'm doing both. Therefore, I don't need you. I'm completely sorted. Thank you very much. But then, of course, you need the information for the ENS. Particularly if you're coming into GB for the first 6 months, but if you're leaving GB and going into Republic of Ireland or mainland Europe, you need the ENS. And of course, you need data. So whilst the trader has been very good and said, here's the MRN for the export, here's the entry number or the MRN for the import, thank you, that's all I need to do. You're sitting there stranded thinking, what good is that to me? I need data, because the ENS requires more data than you might think, and we'll cover that in a minute. So it's important that traders understand that whilst they're well done for being proactive and for organizing yourself, but you must put into that plan how you're going to share the data required for the ENS. Okay, the reason why I say that is that the ENS is officially the carrier's responsibility. So there's quite a lot of traders who just go, well, that's not on our list, so I don't need to do it. And then of course you end up with this, it falls between the cracks, the ENS, and that's why it's become quite a dangerous document. Whew. Moving on to the import entry, we're still in the black zone here. So moving on to the import entry, that can either be a full-blown port entry, a simplified frontier declaration under CFSP with entry later, or EIDR, entry in declarants records, which we'll cover in more detail as we go through that part. Then we're in the green zone because it's all health and food. Well, not necessarily food, but generally food. So you have a phytosanitary certificate or an EHC, which is basically the health certificate. We refer to those quite often. So a phytosanitary is typically for fruit and veg and plants, and a health certificate is for products of animal origin and animal byproducts and so on and so forth. Traces, the next one down, is really giving everybody a lot of grief at the moment because it's a really good, clever system, but it's quite hard to get registered. Once you're on it, it's really good. Getting on it is really hard. And I'd say probably about 30% of the calls we get at the moment are people struggling with the registration on traces. Keep plugging away. We don't have the magic cure here. When somebody rings us and says, I can't get on, guess what? Neither can we. So just so you know, but thanks for the call. So traces is the electronic version of an export health certificate. So for example, it creates something called a CHED, a common health entry document. So if you have an export health certificate, we then have to create a CHED to actually notify the border control post that you're coming. It's part of the process. The traces declaration is an import into the EU function. Okay. And I know in some territories in the EU, they actually use it as an export function as well in order to notify the vet. That's fine. If that's what the local arrangement is, go with that. But generally speaking, both traces and IPAFs is the UK equivalent of traces, are import notification processes. And in fact, the clue's in the name with IPAFs because the I stands for import. Okay, so whether we then come down to Incoterms as to who is responsible for doing this. So, under FCA conditions, the buyer is responsible for the traces or IPAFs. Under DAP conditions, who's responsible for that? Don't know. You need to have a conversation. I mean, under DAP conditions, I'd be inclined to say it's the seller, but I can just see that going wrong. So but there needs to be a conversation that somebody's got to do it. And the danger is both people are looking at each other saying, I thought you were doing that, whilst there's a truck stuck somewhere. BCP, we're nearly there. BCP is the border control post, which is the physical inspection of goods at the frontier, with that Dublin, Calais, Rotterdam, so on and so forth. Although Rotterdam is slightly inland. And of course, in Calais is for products of animal origin and phyto. Fish has to go to Boulogne, and we understand it requires a transit document to leave Calais and go to Boulogne. The finer details of Brexit. But the border control post, according to rules, requires up to 24 hours prior notification. The European legislation actually says, for practical terms, it's possible for the member state to reduce that to around 4 hours, and that's actually in EU text. So the EU text is saying that as a border control post, you need prior notification of what's arriving. That can be anywhere really between 4 hours, but not more than 24 hours. And everyone seems to have gone to 24 hours. There was talk that the French had gone to 4, and then 2 days later that changed and went back to 24. Ireland doesn't seem to be doing anything other than 24 at the moment. You have to remember the context of this, though. They're right in the middle of heavy negotiations, and why would you loosen any of the processes which might weaken the negotiating position? I'm not saying, look, the difference between 20 hours notice at a BCP is going to change how we agree fishing, but it's important that nothing is relaxed until the agreement is done, because then it might not be relaxed at all. So it is what it is. Boom. Duty. Duty's duty. I can't do anything about it. As a customs intermediary, I don't control the duty. I just look in the tariff. It tells me what it is. Neither can you. The duty is whatever the duty is. That said, actually, the ceramic industry did actually get one of the duty figures increased on the original temporary tariff, because it applied to all. It ran the risk of encouraging imports from cheaper imports from China. So there was quite a reaction to that. Anyway, so on the whole, you can't control duty. You can always push them up if you can as an industry body, but it's very hard to push them down. But the one thing you do need to consider is how will it be paid? Who's paying the duty? So duty is one thing. Method of payment is the one that you really need to have on your list. It's not just a matter of who's paying the duty, but what's the method of payment of that duty? Because if it's on your checklist saying, well, the supplier is going to pay the duty or the buyer is going to pay the duty, that's absolutely fine. That's a commercial agreement between the buyer and seller, but it's the method of payment. Who's considering how exactly that's going to be paid at the frontier? Okay, so these are the wires in your toolkit that somehow you need to be able to make a circuit depending on what route you're going in order to flick a switch and make the light come on. Okay, so with a quick sip of my coffee, and we're now going to go route by route. And I have to say, we're going to start with UK. Sorry, I can't say UK anymore. I'm going to start with GBNI, GBROI, and vice versa. They are the most complicated. Ireland has always been the most complicated in the process because for two reasons. One is the complication of Northern Ireland and what processes relate to that. And secondly, Ireland is complicated by geography itself. Is that, quite a lot of industries are within 2 hours of the Port of Dublin. And when the documentation, like the EXS, has to be lodged 2 hours prior to departure, there's often not time to do that. So geography itself and the short distances create a lot of pressure on the GB Ireland flows. Okay, so he says trying to click a box that won't click. Let's do the first one, the NI. Whoops. Yes, sorry, let's do the first one, NI to GB. NI to GB is covered by the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Northern Ireland Protocol initially said that there would be the requirement for an exit safety and security declaration for goods leaving Northern Ireland and travelling to GB. This is because Northern Ireland is part of the protocol. Northern Ireland remains in the UK customs territory, but is operating to the EU customs code. Okay, so the full-blown, full-fat Union Customs Code, which, to be fair, when you start to delve deeper into the UCC, you can find that the UK has not been operating to the UCC ever. So it's been quite a culture shock, and one of the issues, if you like, with the sort of Brexit negotiations is that a territory such as Northern Ireland, with the greatest respect to them, with the least mature in customs processes, are now exposed to some of the most complicated customs processes under the full UCC. But to be fair, we should have been operating under those conditions as well, but the UK took a bit more of a relaxed view of it. So EXS, so NI to GB should require nothing. There was this talk of the EXS that was then covered off by the Internal Markets Bill, where the UK said, no way, dead in a ditch and all that kind of stuff. We're not going to be doing that. And my last look at this last week is that the EU have pretty much agreed that an EXS is not required. Look, it's very difficult for the EU to unilaterally say, do you know what, we don't need an EXS. And then the UK presented the Internal Markets Bill, the balloon went up. Can't help feeling there's quite a bit of choreography going on here. And in the end, the EU agreed. The reason why I think this is choreography is that the EU are completely right to ask for an EXS, because go back to WTO most favoured nation rules. If they don't ask for an EXS, then they can't have an EXS for any trade with anybody else where they don't have a deal. It got kind of swept up with the Northern Ireland Protocol in the end, and they were able to bend the rules based on the NIP. Okay. Let's go the other way, GB to NI. Not as easy, I'm afraid. The Northern Ireland Protocol just says that this is not as easy as the opposite way. The reason being is that in order to keep the border free flowing on the island of Ireland, you've got to make sure that any product that comes into Northern Ireland, you've got to work on the basis that it might actually end up in the Republic of Ireland. And in order to keep the border free flowing on the island of Ireland itself, it's important. Sorry, my screen's jumping all over the place. Sorry, it's important to have some controls. Now, those controls, whilst they're clearly not unfettered, which was the objective, what the UK have done in order to soften the impact of those controls is created the Trader Support Service in order to provide a free-to-use option for traders who are exposed to this additional documentation. Now, what that means in reality is that for flows from GB to NI, a GVMS is required in order to control the MRN numbers of the documents that have been generated. An ENS entry summary declaration is required before you arrive in Northern Ireland. That's handled by the TSS portal, which is live now, live in terms of issuing almost test transmissions, just familiarity live, really, in that you can start to sort of get used to what that looks like. That went live just at the weekend. So that was quite an interesting period with lots of text messages saying this is now live, this is now live, this has been tested. The testing's going very well. There's lots of talk of TSS not being ready, but I can tell you it's not from a lack of effort behind the scenes. It's been real sort of candle burning stuff to try and get this done. You know, we were up against it from day one, really, in terms of timing, and what has been achieved in that time has been immense, considering all of the parties and policies involved. It's involved many meetings of 3 hours or more, hence the reason why doing a 3-hour session like this is fairly normal at the moment. So anyway, so GB to NI requires the ENS to be completed, which is done through the TSS portal. The haulier then has to put the resultant MRN numbers onto the GVMS system. An import declaration is required, but that's handled between the Trader Support Service and the trader directly, which is flagged by the entry in the TSS portal. So when you actually say I've got goods coming in for EORI number XI123, that creates the ENS. The goods then cross the frontier, and Trader Support Service make contact with the owner of XI123 and ask for more information to close the job off. A bit like entering declarants records. Basically, that's the process that's been used, or very similar. Certainly CFSP anyway. Trader Support Service is not involved in SPS controls. There's too much to do in order to cater for all the customs controls. I understand, although I'm not particularly got first hand on this, but I understand that there is a system being operated by customs as in association with Deferred and DERA as a sort of trader support in that respect. I don't actually have the details on it, but once I have them, I'll post them. So right now, phytosanitaries are required. Traces is required. It's not IPAFs in Northern Ireland, even though IPAFs is a UK process. The whole point of this control is that the goods might go south. Therefore, the control needs to be the EU control, which is traces. So right now, there's still a requirement for export health certificates. There's still a requirement for traces entry. You'll have seen from the if you're sad like me and you read these things, that there was a command paper that had certain derogations in it for. I'm frantically trying to find it actually while I'm on here. There was a derogation or a command paper with some derogations for supermarkets, and everyone thought, oh, that's fantastic. That's that done. There's no health certificates required. Just take that with a little bit of a pinch of salt. The first thing to define is what is a supermarket. It's not quite as obvious as it sounds. Just trying to find the command paper, but I don't think I have it in front of me. No, would you believe? What it did say, though, is that products, for the first 3 months, this derogation was that goods destined for the supermarket to be sold to consumers in NI and consumed in NI would not require health certification and could be covered by a more general global certificate. Nobody's seen this general global certificate, but that was what was in the paper. However, it did also say that the product must be labelled that this product from United Kingdom must not be marketed outside of Northern Ireland. That's quite a challenge because that's on every product. One of the customers I work with who ship a lot of products to Northern Ireland said, you know what, it'd be easier to get a health certificate because rather than breaking down pallets and labelling every product, it'd be easier just to get the health certificate in the first place. So there is a derogation. There is some softening of process. The next 10 days will show what that ends up looking like. There's a massive call from the market for some sort of grace period and easing of processes. I have to say I would support that because there's a lot of the trade are finding this a big change very, very quickly. And of course, a lot of systems, and not just on Northern Ireland, but just generally are going live at the last minute. So hopefully there is some sense that comes out of the talks between Michel Barnier and David Frost, and that there is some kind of grace period, not just for NI, but just generally that there is some kind of process where the paperwork exists, a little bit like the UK one, where you just detach it from the movement of goods. So goods can still move, but the process is not quite so tight in terms of the truck. The BCP is there, but that's, as I covered that with the derogation piece, and duty is payable on goods going from GB to NI if those goods are at risk of going south, basically, if they're at risk of going to the Republic of Ireland. Initially that was looked at by the EU saying that's everything, and the UK saying, well, that's nothing. And of course, the answer is somewhere in the middle. I understand, although again, I don't have this just yet, but I think it's very, very close to being released, is that the goods that are at risk, it's possible to self-identify almost like a trusted trader, to actually self-identify those products that you know are remaining in Northern Ireland. You can actually register that with the UK authorities in advance so that there's no duty to pay on at-risk products. If, however, your goods are deemed to be at risk even after self-registration, then duty is payable not pre-boundary or pre-frontier, but actually at the point of the import entry, which is after the goods have moved. Really, the duty would be required to be paid until such time as you can be refunded, then rather, or reclaimed once you can prove that the goods have remained in NI. And of course, if they haven't remained in NI and they've gone to the Republic, then duty was payable, and therefore duty is payable. That's the sort of process going on here. But yeah, complicated one. Trader Support Service is doing their level best to try and simplify it a little bit. It's still more complicated than most of us would like, but we are working really hard to try and bring that in line so that it's workable on day one. The testing and trialing has gone very well. The processes are getting tighter and tighter as we speak. So hopefully we can pull this all down into a lovely smooth package that is more than is required today, but it's not a blocker. That's certainly the intention. However, I do have to bring you back to earth a little bit in saying that the ENS is a consignment level declaration. Let's move to ROI to GB, the more standard Brexit piece, the more sort of standard GB-EU relationship piece. For ROI to GB, you require an export declaration in ROI. You require a GVMS, but not on day one, won't be ready for day one on that kind of movement. A pre-boarding notification is required at Dublin in order for the goods to leave Dublin and travel, so that the export can be closed actually. So that the MRN is loaded on the PBN, so that when the PBN is associated with a truck and a vessel, and that vessel departs, the export will close. An import entry is required in GB, but that can be done under entry and declarants records rules or CFSP or Frontier. Cover that a little bit more in the EU piece in a minute. So just at the moment, yes, an import is required, and if there is no trade deal, duty is payable. A bit more of a straightforward one, that one. And actually, you can see that that's the fairly standard import into GB. If you take GVMS out of that for a minute, you have an export declaration, you have an EU port system as in PBN, you have an import entry in GB of some description, and you have duty payable. That's it. There's sort of 4 pieces. When you go the other way, I did say exports were harder. There's a lot more process. So export from GB into the Republic of Ireland would require an export declaration. GVMS probably not ready, well, definitely not ready on day one for that type of movement. You would require a pre-boarding notification, which would contain the MRN of the ENS and the entry number or MRN of the import entry. So the PBN is required. An ENS entry safety and security declaration is required at consignment level. An import entry is required at consignment level. If there is any SPS goods, go back a bit more really, actually. The ENS is required at consignment level, the import is required at consignment level, and all of those are loaded into the PBN, which is at load level. Well, in terms of the PBN actually creates it at load level. So the PBN's for one truck, and underneath that truck are all the MRNs relevant to that truck. Okay, nothing to say on that. SPS, when you look at the SPS controls in green again, that if there is phytosanitary or health certificate, they are required on day one. Traces declaration has to be done in advance of arrival. No need for IPAFs because this is a GB import rather than an EU import rather than a GB import. And the border control post at Dublin, for example, needs to be informed in advance. And that's also handled by the Department for the Environment, Department for Agriculture in Ireland on the DAFM portal. So you would typically have an export declaration, an ENS, an import, a PBN covering the import and the ENS declaration. The health certificate would be issued, passed to an agent, or you can do this yourself, doing the traces declaration, and then the CHED, which is created by the traces declaration and the export health certificate, are uploaded to the DAFM portal so that that's there before you arrive. Whew. Told you exports were difficult. And then of course on top of that is duty may well be payable on arrival, which there's obviously ways of doing that. You can either do that with a duty deferment account, or this cash TAN, where you've actually got a prepaid duty deferment account, if you like. Not included transit in this piece because generally speaking we've gone with the normal rather than the exception. I mean, the exception is transit really. If you've got a temporary storage facility, which is a customs terminology, not just a temporary shed. Sorry, it's not really very romantic terminology for what it is, but if you've got a warehouse which has got TSF approval, then the goods can obviously pass through Dublin on transit and go straight to your warehouse and then be broken down back into consignment level again. So the transit would do the sort of load level from depot to depot, and you would break the load down in the depot on arrival in Dublin, for example, break that down and clear those goods and deliver them as you go. That doesn't remove any border control post functions or anything like that. It just covers a different process of getting through the frontier. NI to GB via ROI. Whoa, okay, we did say we'd go granular because with 10 days to go, it's important we go granular. Northern Ireland to Great Britain via the Republic. An oddball one, this one really, because there's no export required from Northern Ireland. there's no transit document required to pass through the Republic because the goods aren't in transit. However, there is the need for a PBN because you can't be entering Dublin saying, well, look, hey, I've just come from the north, I'm absolutely fine, I've got nothing. They're going to need something. And equally, the UK is going to want to know that that vessel that's rocked up in Holyhead, half of the consignments haven't got any paperwork at all because they're from Northern Ireland, whereas the other half have got some form of import control because they were from Southern Ireland. So it's important that some form of control exists so that you can differentiate between the two. Now that's likely to either, and it's not yet agreed, but that's likely to either land as an EXS, an exit summary safety and security declaration raised in Northern Ireland, therefore creating an MRN that can be loaded on the PBN, or potentially a transit document, although I think the transit documents is a bit of a nonsense because that's just trying to prove that when the goods arrive in GB that they are actually NI T2 origin, if you like, proving that the goods are UK goods re-entering the UK. It seems like a sledgehammer to crack a walnut, that one, really. I can see it landing on an EXS though, is that there is some control if you're going via the south. Of course, the problem here is a lot of people don't know which way the goods are going until they pass them over to the logistics operator. And that's why the EXS is quite good, because that would be a carrier responsibility. I think the transit really is too much, but the EXS, I kind of get how that might work. Anyway, GB to NI via ROI, again, a trader support service journey. This is very similar to the previous trader support in terms of the import leg, but because of the routing, it's putting some complexity into it, simply because of geography and because of the way logistics networks work. So a movement from GB to Northern Ireland via the south, the tricky bit here is the south, not the GB to NI bit. It's passing through the Republic. So you would need a transit document to arrive at Dublin and be allowed to leave without clearing. So that would be a transit document to an authorised premises in Northern Ireland. It would require a GVMS entry in Holyhead, for example, because remember I said GVMS is working for transit and for the Northern Ireland flows. Well, this is both. You would require a PBN, the pre-boarding notification, which would have the transit document details in it, so that Dublin becomes an office of transit rather than an office of destination. You'd need an ENS, which can, in simplified transit, be attached to the transit, but it's nonetheless required. So it also require an entry safety and security declaration in the south. The eventual import entry in the north would be covered by the Trader Support Service under the same sort of mechanism as it is today, if with direct shipment, i.e. the vehicle enters the territory and is then the import documentation is finalised afterwards. If there is phytosanitary certificates, health certificates, they would be required because you're entering the territory of the EU. And you would have to go to the BCP, the border control post in Dublin. Any derogation that might exist on the north is unlikely to be valid, if you like, at the border control post in the south. So the number one rule, if in an ideal world with a fair wind and all that, you would actually ship anything from GB to NI ships to NI. But in practical senses, that's not always the case. So we're working very hard behind the scenes to get a workable model for day one on that, which allows you to transit through. But that's solving the model in terms of the transit is one part of it, but you can see that it's not the only part of it. It's definitely more complicated by passing through the south to drive to Northern Ireland than it would be going direct. Of course, if this has been recorded, we think we also left it possible for people to record these calls, because these slides are really quite powerful in that by having one for every route, they're a very useful document. But we'll put them on our website anyway as a download of this piece. It's quite a big. It's too big to email. It's about 45 megabytes, I think. ROI to GB, blimey, forgetting where you started, aren't you? ROI to GB via NI. So ROI to GB, but you're going up through the top. That would still require the EAD from the Republic of Ireland. That's normal. That's a normal process. GVMS probably not on day one for exits from NI. You require an import entry in GB, and you require the payment of duty in GB. So pretty much the same as shipping direct. So ROI through the north to GB is pretty much the same as ROI through the south to GB. GB to NI has its process. GB via the south to NI, world of pain. HubSpot seems to want me to log on. It's not going to leave me alone, is it? GB to ROI via NI. Again, this happens. This is movements from Scotland, for example, crossing Cairn Ryan Larne in order to go to the south. And then, of course, there's the old Donegal problem, is where do you clear if you're going to Donegal? I honestly don't have a solution to that yet. We're working hard to find one. But right now, if you have this kind of movement, and we'll come back to Donegal in a moment, but let's just say we're going to the middle of Ireland here, is that you've crossed through Cairn Ryan Larne, but your actual destination is in the south. You'd require an export declaration from GB because it's GB export. You'd require a transit. I'm going to come back to that one in a minute. You'd require the GVMS declaration in order to handle the Office of Transit function. You wouldn't require a PBN because you're not going into the south. The ENS can be covered. The entry summary declaration can be covered by the portal system of Trader Support Service as normal. Again, it's at consignment level. The import entry would have to be done in the south. Come back to that again in a minute. Border control post would be in the north, which is odd, and duty would be paid in the south. Now, the import entry and the TAD is the important bit. When you raise a transit document that allows you to drive through Belfast and go inland, basically, you've got to be going inland to an approved location. A transit has to be closed at an office of destination or as kind of a satellite approved location attached to that office of destination. So that might be authorized consignees, for example. Now, in the absence of a temporary storage facility approval, that's the port. So suddenly that could be driving from Cairn Ryan to Larne and then having to drive to Dublin to enter the clearance location to shut the transit document and lodge the import entry. Now, that's clearly nonsense if you're going to Donegal. But right now I don't have a solution in my pack for what Donegal looks like. We'll keep working on it. We'll release it as soon as we know. But right now, as far as I know, I'm happy to be corrected. The only sort of generally authorized locations, aside from specific authorizations for temporary storage facility, the only general authorizations in the south are Dublin, Cork, probably Rosslare, and Shannon. So Donegal is sitting up there as a beautiful part of the world that you can't clear a transit in. We'll see. And then the oddball one, of course, with the Northern Ireland Protocol, is that initially it was there to sort of keep the island of Ireland flowing without a frontier. So anything from the north or the south, there's nothing required at all between north and south in either direction. It was then pointed out to the EU that you just kind of annexed the EU here, is that you had a special arrangement for the Republic of Ireland that wasn't relevant anywhere else. You thought, oh, yeah, that's true, can't have that. So the situation now is that in any dealings with the EU, whether that's for Northern Ireland, any dealings with the EU is the same as though you're dealing with the South. So therefore, anything between the Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland is duty-free, process-free. Anything between Northern Ireland and France is duty-free, process-free. Okay, so there's no duty on EU imports into NI. There's no duty on NI imports into the mainland EU or the Republic of Ireland. However, good old GB gets in the way here. So there's a transit document required on land bridge. That's particularly troublesome because you're back down to that. I've got to raise a transit somewhere, which is at an authorized location. That can be at the port of exit, but tends to be at an authorized consignor location. And then you've got to close the transit when you arrive back in the other territory. So it's a complication that maybe a lot of you could do without. Again, if you're leaving from the north, you would need a GVMS to control the transit. If you're leaving from the south, you would have a PBN to put the transit details on. you would require an entry safety and security declaration to re-enter the EU. And this is the big one. There's a lot of talk about this being relaxed, but I get conflicting answers every day. Is that the European rules say that if you leave the EU with products of animal origin, i.e. for a GB land bridge, you must re-enter the EU through a border control post, which means that you need full controls here, full export declarations, traces, so on and so forth. However, we also hear that there's relaxations for GB land bridge, but again, that it's not in stone. It depends who you talk to as to how that goes, and I just get the different answers everyone I speak to. So right now, it is what it is. Is that if you leave the EU, when you re-enter the EU, you must do so through a border control post. Of course, what you've also seen now are new services from Dunkirk to Rosslare. There's Zeebrugge, Dublin, and there's this general, one of the best ways to mitigate the process risks of Brexit and the duty risk is avoid GB. So there are certainly these new ferry services starting up. That just gives you more reason to think that there probably won't be any form of implementation period, because there's a fairly hefty investment in getting some of those processes going. But let's see, we still remain in hope. It is Christmas after all. We're now going to look at mainland Europe. So we've got about 3 slides for this one. It's nowhere near as complicated. And then again, we'll take another 5-minute break. Okay. Can't believe how quick the time's going, actually. We're 2 hours into this. It's the same again, same process. So we'll whip through these ones a lot faster. So there's an EAD, an export declaration. There's an EXS, an exit summary declaration. GVMS, which we know is the UK travel wallet for MRNs. The ENS, safety and security declaration. 2 hours prior to arrival at the arrival frontier. EPS, we thought we were short of an acronym, so we created one, which is the EPS, which we're kind of calling the European Port System. That again is like the GVMS, it's like a travel wallet. For France is SI Brexit, for Belgium is RX Seaport, and for Holland is Port Base. Then we talk about imports in 3 different veins, really. FFD, the full frontier declaration for port entry, basically. Import entry, that's an import entry other than at frontier, i.e. for a transit that's so the import entry is taking place inland, or in GB, for example, entry in declarants records where the import entry is taking place away from the frontier. Then we've got SFD subdec. This is another a slightly one step down approval, if you like, on CFSP approval. CFSP approval is that you would do a simplified frontier declaration as a kind of promise to do a full declaration later, and then the supplementary declaration is presented after the event. I'm going to come back to those 2 in a minute, actually, particularly the EIDR versus SFD and subdec. Health certificates are the same. In fact, no difference there. Phytosanitary health certificates, traces is the electronic version for SPS. IPAFs is the UK traces. BCP is the same BCP, border control post, that covers the first frontier, though. So it's very important, if you remember, if you're going from, say, UK to Italy, GB to Italy, you would have the ENS in Calais, and you would have the border control post in Calais, assuming you're shipping through Calais, of course. It's not at the destination, it's at the first touch point of the re-entry or the entry into that European territory. And duty is duty, and how are you going to pay it is one of the more important factors, not how much is it. Let's go back to the import entry and subdec. We get asked quite a lot by people to actually do full frontier declarations. Look, they're doable, but I don't think it's a good idea on day one. There's enough process going on and enough pressure on everything to not do a full frontier declaration. You might as well do it the next day, because it looks and feels exactly like the same thing. The other one is an SFD with a subdec. And of course, with the full frontier declaration, let's just come back a minute. The full frontier declaration is one of the issues with that is you've got to make sure that the duty is the funds are there to pay the duty. So rather than having an entry in declarants records, you can sit there saying, well, look, I'm going to do a full frontier declaration because I'm absolutely fine and I've got my own deferment account. Okay, if you have your own deferment account as a legacy from your sort of non-EU imports, it's not likely to be sufficient in most cases for this new increased volume of traffic. So a full frontier declaration, which seems like a nice idea in an ideal world, could suddenly be an E9 insufficient funds on about the 20th of the month, and you're stuck now because you've decided to do a document that you really didn't need to do. So just have a think about it, just initially at least. Even if you just decide in month 2 you want to do import entries, why flex it? Why put pressure on it at the moment? It's the same with the SFD and subdeck, is that it's not required. It's entry in declarants records is a process. You can simulate the SFD internally by us holding records so that we can compare them. It's the same thing as the SFD. The other thing, and the big red flag here, is that if a consignment comes into GB on a groupage trailer and we clear that whole groupage trailer on an SFD on our CFSP approval, sorry about all the acronyms, so we've done a simplified frontier declaration against our promise to do an entry later, we're on the hook for that duty come what may, because we've promised to do an entry later. We've already taken responsibility for doing that entry by completing a simplified frontier declaration. If, however, that vehicle comes in under entry in declarants records approval, and the trader now has to apply for entry in declarants records, or if he doesn't apply for it, the supplementary declaration can be done by an intermediary. That's the relationship between the trader and customs. So the intermediary, i.e. us, will be saying, give me the duty and I will do the declaration. If you don't give me the duty, I'm not doing the declaration, and it's the matter between you and the trade and you and customs, nothing to do with me. So SFD creates a liability layer that is unnecessary on day one. EIDR still has that liability layer, but it's between the trader and customs directly. I know which one we'll be doing. So let's go route by route. Graphics not so pretty on this one, sorry. Mainland EU into GB. About as easy as it can get, this one. Same as ROI into GB. An export declaration is required in the sending country. That requires that MRN has to be lodged at the European port system, whether that's SI Brexit, port base, RxC port, so on and so forth. No ENS required because remember it's relaxed. GVMS not ready on day one. FFD not really part of the plan day one. Import declaration, entry in declarants records, very much part of the plan on day one. SFD subdeck, not initially the plan on day one. There's too many things on fire to be messing around with the garden furniture. Okay, so it doesn't mean we can't do them. It just means I'm not planning to do them on day one. That's it, nothing. So an export declaration, put the MRN number on SI Brexit, knock yourself out, you're in GB. We'll do the entry tomorrow or next month or next week, whenever the heck you want to do it. But let's not stress the movement of the goods. So literally you load the goods in Munich, you do a commercial invoice, packing list, export declaration, lodge that on the Calais logistics envelope, you're good to go. You then just need a piece of paper with the EORI number of the GB importer. That's it, that's entry in declarants records. Easily, just jumping back one, easily the easiest slide in the pack, as well as the ROI one. ROI GB, of course. GB to France, let's say, and we've chosen this, what we actually mean here is GB to the first territory of arrival, because there's a different process if you're shipping to one territory and moving into another. So we're taking France as an example. This is export. I mean, every box is ticked on this. So this is an export from GB, and this is what, this is the world of pain we're moving into. And this is why I'm saying this is so complicated. Let's not go looking for other complications. So an export from GB requires an export declaration, which generates an EXS, a transit potentially, if you're not planning to clear on the pre-lodged French import entry. And generally the feeling from France is that it's probably 50-50, in terms of who will clear inland and who will clear on the anticipated port entry. So just following that blue line for a minute, because we've got a transit, then we need an import entry inland somewhere. Okay, so if there is a transit, there's an import entry. Moving on from transit for a minute, we have the GVMS potentially required if there's a transit. Won't be working for normal export, export controls, but it will be working as an office of transit function if there is a transit required for inland clearance in France. Entry summary declaration is required in France. Some form of frontier declaration is required in France in terms of either a pre-lodged import entry unless it's on transit, and that all has to be put in the SI Brexit system or the European port system. We'll come back to we'll get to the green bit in a minute. So basically, when you are traveling from putting the safety and security aside for a minute, when you're leaving GB to go to France, and this is very important even for your Kent access permit, you're leaving either with the GB export MRN and the French anticipated pre-lodged import entry MRN, either those two together, or one single MRN for a transit from GB to, say, Paris, where the customs, the eventual customs clearance will take place. So it's one or the other. So you've either got an export and an import, or you've got a transit. There's no real combination other than that. This is at consignment level here, though, although the transit, of course, could be for the entire truck. So you've either got export MRN, import MRN, or just a transit MRN. Then, of course, at Calais, you've got the safety and security declaration that's been pre-lodged in France, and the MRN of that is also on the SI Brexit. You've then got a border control post functions in France with the phytosanitary and health certificates, traces entry in the destination country, not actually France, but you're just highlighting what border control point you're going to in France, the border control point itself, and the duty payment somewhere in France, whether that's an anticipated entry at the time of crossing the channel, or whether that's an inland customs clearance because the transit has allowed that process to take place. VAT, as I understand it in France, is postponed VAT accounting, so there's no cash to pay there, it's just duty. Into inland Europe, it's actually a bit simpler because it's one rule. It can only be one thing, is that you have the EAD, you have the transit, you've got to do a transit. Yes, you've got to do a transit. You need the GVMS record as the Office of Transit. You need the ENS record at the first European touch point, the Entry Safety and Security Declaration. You need to put that information of the transit and the ENS into the port arrival system, which might be SI Brexit, port base, RxC port, so on and so forth. You need an import entry somewhere in mainland Europe, depending on where you're going, whether that's an authorized consignor or whether that's a third-party location. You need health controls if you've got SPS goods, and those health controls take place at the first touch point of the new territory. So even though you're going to Germany, they're not taking place in Germany, they're taking place at Calais. And you need the payment of duty if duty is indeed payable. So when you've got transit, you've got to remember that you're in that situation where you have you require a Kent access permit if you're going out through Eurotunnel or Dover. One of the reasons for this is just to make sure people don't come flooding into Kent without being border ready for France. So this is covered by the Kent access permit, or the CAP, also known as the Kermit, was also referred to as. I was on a recent seminar with customs where they referred to the CAP, and which is what it's generally been called. But they actually said, as you approach Dover, cap in hand. Oh, dear me. That's an English expression. I'm sorry if it doesn't translate. It's not rude, don't worry. In order to get a Kent access permit, a Kent access permit is required if you are a goods vehicle of 7.5 tonne or more. If you don't have one and you attempt to enter Kent without one, you'll be fined £300 every time. When push comes to shove and Kent's getting a little bit full, traffic priority will go to these two types of goods only, not medicines, not food, but fish, which I believe is live fish. No, actually it's fish generally, and day-old chicks. They're the only ones that will have any kind of priority. Now, I had originally thought that meant that they could be stopping other vehicles coming into Kent. I'm assured that's not the case, and it's just that if there is maximum congestion and vehicles are being held up at Manston, Ashford, so on and so forth, then priority will be given to fish and chicks. You'd have to go, I think, to Ebbsfleet, which is the Eurostar station up near London, top of Kent really, to sort of self-declare that you have fish and chicks, or fish and chicks, fish or chicks, and then you will be given a particular type of permit which will allow you to pass through the traffic. That's going to cause a riot in my book, but that's the process. When you apply for your Kent access permit, you'll either get an amber permit, which means that you've got, for example, you've got a transit document and you've got the paperwork you want, or well, no, you've actually got a transit document, but it's not yet authenticated, and therefore you need to stop somewhere to have it authenticated. A red one means you haven't got anything at all, and stop, do not come, do not pass go, do not collect £200. If you try and get into Kent, it's going to cost you 300 quid. There is a beta site. You can go on and actually create Kent access permits at the moment. Okay. Let's just take, as we move into the last hour, let's just take 5 minutes there, because I'm now going to go heavy into transit. So take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back. Right, back in the room, on for the final push. Well done for sticking with it. We talk about transit quite a lot, and I think we should cover that a bit more detail. So, excuse me, a quick biscuit, not a good idea. I've now got a mouthful of biscuit. Right, so transit. It's the solution to a lot of problems, but it's a problem in its own right. So we often hear about everything will be all fine, we're just going to have transit documents. It's caught up with me. What do you need to do a transit? First of all, you need a transit guarantee. That's normally a bank guarantee lodged with a bank in order to cover the liability which the transit document that you've created is covering, which is the VAT and duty liability of the goods moving past or through a frontier uncleared. In theory, you should have, I'm not quite sure this works in practice, it does in some areas, I'm told, you should have a guarantee to cover all open transits at any one time. Bearing in mind, a transit can be open for around about 7 to 9 days. So there's a cumulative liability on those transits, and your transit guarantee level must be sufficient to cover the cumulative liability on those documents which are still raised but not yet closed. Okay, so it's not unusual for a trader or a small intermediary to require a £1 million guarantee. Quite a few of my friends have got 20 million plus. It's a big amount, you know. But it's a big piece to cover. Having the guarantee is one thing, covering the liability is another thing altogether. But you need a guarantee. In some cases, it's possible to get 100% waiver on the bank guarantee side, particularly if you're AEOC, authorized economic operator for customs purposes. So you can get a guarantee with no bank attached to it at all. But don't run away with this idea, because what you're doing then is issuing documents with the liabilities on them for up to say 15 million quid, and it's the liability that will kill your company, not the bank, not the bill from customs. You saw that one coming, you know. I'm going ahead of myself here. Yes, you need a bank behind it. It is possible to get 100% waiver with AEOC, as I mentioned. Raising a document is one thing, authenticating the document is something else. So in order to raise a transit, you must have a transit guarantee. And then in order to authenticate that transit, you either have to go to a port to have that done, or you can authorize it at or you can endorse it at an authorized consignor location. It's worth noting, though, that the authorized consignor location sits underneath the approval of the transit holder. So, for example, I could have an address in Milton Keynes, which is an authorized consignor location under my transit guarantee. Then the customer falls out with me and decides to work with someone else on transits. The customer's not an authorized consignor. The location in Milton Keynes was my authorized consignor, not his. So it's worth bearing that in mind, that the trader, unless it's the transit holder that owns the authorized consignor status underneath. And then, of course, when you raise a transit, you've got to close a transit. So it has to be destined for an office of destination. You can't just raise one up willy-nilly and say, knock yourself out, drive around Europe looking for a customs agent that will somewhere close that transit. Even when we're raising a transit, we have to sort of say, where's it starting? Where's it passing through? Where's it ending? And they're the key factors in raising that documentation. So there has to, as I say, it has to be approved. Going back to the authorized consignor, it's a very important step, because if you don't have the authorized consignor status, i.e. that you're raising a document inland and up country. Now we've got authorized consignor locations at a lot of our depots and members. I think one of the best ones for me is our place in Corby, because it's kind of the dead center of GB. It's in the kind of logistics triangle. So Corby is, if anyone's in trouble, you can always get to Corby. I'm sure that's not their slogan. The marketing board of Corby, but whatever. But nonetheless, if you're ever in trouble, you can always get to Corby. That was quite a campaign, that would be. But it's important that you're not driving to Kent looking to go to Motis or Stop 24. As much as I love them, you don't want to be joining a massive queue of trucks wanting to get to Motis and Stop 24 to endorse their transit document because they didn't endorse it further up country. You're going to end up sitting with a bit of a pile. There's going to be a queue, no matter how you do it. The designing processes for that is that having a transit document is one thing. It's the authentication of that transit document, which is the vital element. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at a guarantee that requires some activity. We're looking at an authorised consignor, and we're looking at authorised consignee, stroke office of destination. These are difficult nuts to crack. And then I was introduced to TransitNet, where initially I thought, that's odd. How's that work? Talk me through that again. And the more I've looked at it, the more I like it. TransitNet is a fabulous managed transit system, if you like, that comes with a bank of authorised consignees, a bank of authorised consignors. They do the due diligence on you, and then they also provide your guarantee, if you like. So you have an account with them and you're able to use their guarantee in your sort of proportion of that. And it's just such a good service that it was a nut that needed cracking, and SGS TransitNet have done a fabulous job. So completely in support of them. We're one of their approved contractors now, so that we can actually work an introduction into TransitNet for you. So just shout if you need us to do that. It also means you can raise transits and close transits in any CTC member state. Bearing in mind that's more than just the EU. So we're seeing how this develops, but on the whole, so far it's been a really worthwhile exercise. The customer of ours would actually have TransitNet have two ways of working, where they actually have a kind of an e-customer and a non-e-customer. So they'll agree an account with the client, and the client has then got one rate for if they're doing the document electronically, and a higher rate if they're doing the document through a sort of manual process of asking TransitNet to do the document on their behalf. Our ideal situation, because we're processors more than anything else, is that the client forms their own relationship with TransitNet. The client's then happy, if you want to do your own documents electronically, do your own documents electronically. We're not kidnapping anybody. Equally, if you don't want to do your documents electronically, we can do those for you, promoting you to an e-customer, thereby having a cheaper price or a lower price. Cheap's not the right word. A lower price with TransitNet than you would do as a more cumbersome non-e client. So keep in touch with us with that. But the idea is always, the mechanics of it is always that the client opens their own direct account with TransitNet. We handle the data and the form submission on your account with TransitNet, or equally you've got the option to do it yourselves if you'd rather not pay us to press the keys. Completely your choice. So lots of flexibility. We don't feel threatened by it. We feel like it actually adds a lot of service. So we're happy to be an approved contractor. Here's a graphic that took a while. People often say to me, well, when do I need a transit? So this is one for keeping, for looking at later, but let's try and cover it. Ireland to GB, you don't really require a transit in either direction, unless you really want to, unless you're going to clear inland. You're either going to clear inland at Dublin beyond the port, or you're going to clear inland at Northampton, having passed through Holyhead, for example. That's that one. Let's do the light blue. GB to France, you only need a transit if you're clearing inland beyond Calais and you're not going to do the anticipated entry, so it's optional. Let's do the first red one, GB to Germany via France. Yes, you need a transit because you're going to arrive in France, drive straight through it, out the back, and go to Germany where the customs clearance is taking place. So the only way you can be allowed to pass through a member state uncleared is with a transit document. Germany to UK via France, you don't need a transit. You do not need a transit to go from the EU to GB. Okay, let that sink in a bit. You don't need a transit to transit the EU with EU goods, and you can't set off for GB unless your import path is clear. Therefore, there's no transit taking place. So under normal circumstances, you would not require a transit to go from Germany to Harlow, let's say, in Essex. What a weird place to choose. I used to work in Harlow, so it's not a weird place. I just not one that would necessarily translate. So you're going from Germany to Milton Keynes again. Okay, so you're going from Munich to Milton Keynes. There, we've got the alliteration in the end. So you're going from Munich to Milton Keynes. You do not need a transit document. Okay, because you just need the MRN lodged on the on the SI Brexit system at Calais, and then you will arrive and either with a frontier declaration, or come back to that one in a minute, or an entry in declarant's records, and you go off to Milton Keynes, then you do the import. If you arrive with a transit, the difficulty is where are you going to close that transit? Because you might not be doing the import entry for another week, and therefore you'd have to go to an approved consign or approved office of destination location to either do the import or to lodge the transit to receive a reference number, which will then be referenced on the eventual import in GB. Unnecessary. Which brings me back to that frontier declaration. Sorry, I said I'd come back to that. If, for example, you want to do a transit and you want a frontier declaration to close the transit, one of the problems with this is it's not set up. Day one is set up for flow over control. So if, for example, somebody says to me, I need a frontier declaration or I need a simplified frontier declaration, I'm going to do an entry that isn't needed on in a time when there's struggling to get through what is needed. To receive an entry number that I've got nowhere to put. I'm literally going to put it in my briefcase and take it home with me because GVMS isn't working. The driver, the driver doesn't need the entry number. If the driver's got the entry number, then fine, he can wave that in front of anybody who's interested. But equally, he'll have the EORI number of the importer, and they'll let it go with that anyway. So there's some of these processes just not required on day one, and this is one of them. The one I'm hearing quite a bit from France is that they're struggling to have a process that will close the EAD. So a German EAD is struggling to close in Calais, and transit might be one of the mechanisms for that. I've got to see how that pans out, because if not, that's going to create a transit to handle the export, which ticks the Calais box, but creates a world of pain in GB when I've now got a transit and I don't know what to do with it. So there's certainly no requirement from the UK's point of view for a transit, and you don't need a transit to transit the EU with EU goods. Phew, I can make a point on that one. Let's move down to the red box from France to Ireland via GB, transit, because you're land bridging through another customs territory. And the bottom grey one, France to Ireland direct by a ferry, Dunkirk Rosslare, for example, equally valid for Zeebrugge, Dublin, so on and so forth. Nothing at all, no transit, no health certs, no nada, nothing, zip. Okay, but the flash one there for me is the GB into mainland Europe. That's the troublesome one. That's the one that needs a bit more activity. So with our partners as well in the consortium, we've been under a lot of pressure to put together a bank of agents across Europe, and Elaine's been working frantically on that in the background, with me kind of getting in her way really, but there's so many things going on at the same time. It's important that we try and cover them all, and we do it in a structured way. We're nearly there, and right now the intention, as I don't think we're very far away, is that we've sort of pinned key locations where customs clearances should take place. What we don't want to do is have people wandering around aimlessly in mainland Europe looking for an agent, or equally having to drive to the agent to clear. Now, in some customs territories you can clear pretty much anywhere remotely, and in others you can't. You've actually got to go to the customs station. So along with the agents at the moment, we're building up a register of clearance locations in these key places. So if I need to clear in Prague, where do I go? If I need to clear in Vienna, where do I go? Salzburg, where do I go? Lyon, where do I go? Bologna, Milan, Torino, where do I go? Big fat apology to Manuel here in Valencia. The graphic didn't fit, my friend. So I'm not discounting Valencia, but I wanted to get the graphic big enough to see, and I lost a bit of Spain in the process. So Manuel, nothing meant by that. We've still got some work to do in this area. It's the least amount of traffic in that area, if you like, and we've concentrated most on this kind of line of clearances across mainland Europe. A big hole in the middle of Germany, but we don't need, if you've got the fringes, it doesn't matter. We try to take the arterial routes in most cases, or the key locations. We've included Chiasso. We've included Chiasso in our text, actually, although I'm not necessarily looking to include Chiasso. I might instead flip to Brenner, because I don't particularly want to be doing customs paperwork for things that aren't currently broken, like Switzerland. Yeah, there's I'll cover that in the Q&A actually. Somebody asked a very good question about, well, what happens to the Swiss traffic and the Turkish traffic, for example, but I'll cover that in a moment. This one keeps coming up, so let's cover it. These are the data requirements for the safety and security declaration. Big fat thank you to Tyler for that one, because I kept wandering around going, are you sure? Are you sure? And Tyler's done all the mapping brilliantly, actually, on all the processes for the Trader Support Service, in a constant fight with customs and policy people who say, well, it needs to do this and it needs to do that. And as Tyler rightly pointed out, this is in danger of becoming that typical kind of a camel is a horse designed by a committee. You know, just everybody wanted a bit of something, so we had a couple of humps. Tyler's had fight after fight after fight with customs policy people saying, well, it's got to say this, it's got to say that, and you know, we're at the practical end of yeah, okay, but the truck's got to move. So we've come down to this, and we're trying to simplify this as much as possible now, even on the TSS portal. But certainly on the right hand side, oh, sorry, the left hand side, you've got the sort of typical header information of the carrier, the truck, which way is it going, is it sealed, what's the type of route, and then on the right hand side, can't get my lefts and rights right, on the right hand side is the kind of consignment level information, so EORI to EORI. Generally speaking, if they're not controlled goods, this could be fairly loose. I mean, it has to be accurate, but not fairly fairly loose. So, you know, 5 boxes of bicycle parts, or you know, sports bicycle parts. You don't have to have commodity codes, you don't have to have too much finer detail, but there's a thing on our website actually, which is quite a few years old now, about the words that you can use and the words you can't use. So you can't just put parts, but you can put parts for machines used in so and so, so and so. So you have to be a little bit precise, but not massively so, unless it's controlled goods, and controlled goods are more than you'd think. Actually, it's not just, you know, I was thinking controlled goods might be crocodile skin shoes and conflict diamonds. Not quite. It's a pork pie. It's controlled goods because it's products of animal origin. And once you're in that category, then you have to split down your ENS declaration to include commodity code, origin and value, and any supplementary units. So it's a kind of a diet version of an import entry to get the level of control going. And the value one gives a lot of grief because remember the ENS is the responsibility of the carrier. And a lot of the traders are actually saying, look, we're going to do our own export declarations, we're going to do our own import declarations because we don't want everybody to see the price. And then they find out they're carrying controlled goods and the carrier needs the price. So there's some issues with that. We'll have to see how that lands. Don't have all the answers, just have a lot of the questions. Now I want to just run through what we've done about certain things. Now it's a pretty fractious place to be at the moment because we're trying to, as I say, pitch a tent in the wind at the moment. We've got everybody wanting to test data. We're equally trying to make sure that we're testing mass, not individual. And everybody wants to see end-to-end trials. And look, I get it. It's difficult. There's a lot going on. But as much as possible, what we're just doing is, you know, when we're testing data, is just say, look, okay, that data is good to go. Yeah, that will go through our systems. So I just wanted to run through what some of our systems look like so that you would understand what I mean. We've always focused on master data, is get some information to us so that we know about you in advance. We got the EORI numbers, so we got everything populated. We haven't got enough EORI numbers. I think we should have about, in the new world, probably about 25 to 35,000 EORI numbers. We've got about 8,000, I have to say, not just the 8. I can number them, I can name them all. So there's 8,000 EORI numbers. I don't think that's enough. So yeah, but this thing will grow as it goes. But it will definitely slow us down in the early stages because this is a situation now where you're doing a customs entry and the first thing you're doing is creating the address book. Really, that's an unnecessary task that we shouldn't be doing. We then asked for data generally, just so that we could get an idea of what kind of commodity codes we would be exposed to, so that we could make sure, yeah, not every agent's exposed to every commodity code, but if we got some sort of visibility on the types of commodity codes we were likely to see, then we could prep for that, really. Okay. That didn't quite go according to plan because there are not enough traders engaged with us. So there's only about sort of 10% of those that should have engaged, but we had a rethink about that, and I'll cover that in a minute. What do we do when we get master data is we verify the data that people have given us, and we fill in any blanks on our master data tables to make sure that we're able to get entry level information. What people always say to me is like, well, why don't the customer just send you the information for the customs entry and you submit it? Because they don't know all the coding, and it's the additional information coding, which is the banana skin in a customs entry. Easily the most complicated part of the customs entry is the additional information coding. The box 44 is a complicated place to live. You have to have a lot of codes to, in the UK, you have to show what codes are the prohibition and restriction codes and what your documentation is for that. In Ireland, you have to show all the ones that you need, even though you don't need them. And it's all taken as that you've got to actually quote them and say you don't need them. So, it's a complicated world. There's a lot to do. We then do test entries once we've got your commodity codes. And as I say, we're relying on master data in order to get this kind of visibility of the commodity codes we were being exposed to. And really, the market just didn't engage at the right sort of pace. So we had a bit of a different view of it. And we turned off master data a little bit, and we got a little bit of grief for not responding to people quite as quickly as we were before. But we just took a different view. We've got to always go to the lowest common denominator in all of this prep and planning. And what we've ended up with is we've gone through every commodity code. So rather than wait to see what commodity codes we might be exposed to, we've imagined a truck with every commodity code on it. And there are 15,624. In fact, that number keeps changing a little bit, actually, not massively, but just at the end. But there are 15,624 commodity codes. And we've done a test entry on every single one of them. Including all the box 44 coding, all the origin coding, so on and so forth. We've done everything as though it was from America, because it's hard to, although we did have to change a little bit when there were retaliatory duty rates when Trump was having a fit with everybody. And then we had to flip to China, who seemed a lot more friendly. So, but every single one of those 15,624 commodity codes has passed through our system, and we got an entry number back. That's given us some good data. It took a year to do, to actually get entries right. One entry, as Tyler will always tell you, it's probably in his book actually, was about cowberries that took 10 days to get through. Nobody could get this blooming thing through. Nobody, to this day, I don't know what a cowberry is. It's a strange sort of plant like an elderberry. But the coding just seemed to be consistent on it, and everyone had a go at it. And I think we were good nearly 10 days in before we got this entry through. But now we are the national cowberry customs clearance agent. So if anything comes up, if any of you have cowberries, you know where to ring. If that's ever going to happen. The idea has always been to try and kind of get as much of the groundwork and base work done now, rather than just sitting there waiting for day one. And because of that, then hopefully we can make gathering load data a bit simpler. We can pass a lot of it through a master data filter so that we can enrich those commodity codes with the additional supplementary codes that we've already highlighted and identified. We can also make sure that if there is a immersing code required, we ask for it. If there is SPS controls, we ask for that. If there's a second quantity, we ask for that. So on. So just trying to build up this rules-based system at the moment, meaning then that our team here that I'm looking out at, God, how many here today? It's about 13 here today, but they're on shift, so there's only a quarter of them in at any one time. They're only here really to deal with the chief queries. So when an entry drops out because of a coding error, or anything that just requires other than robots. So thank you. There's some bits that we've done where we just haven't put automation on it from day one. Typically that would be IPR, OPR and things like that. So because we don't yet know the trend, and it's pointless spending too much time putting robots on it. So what does that look like? Well, the data into us is very important. As much as possible, we want to discourage that old traditional way of doing customs clearance. That I was talking to a friend of mine a while ago. He said, "Oh, we've got a portal." I went, "Oh, brilliant. What does that do?" He said, "Well, the portal is so that the customer can send us the PDF of the bill of lading, the invoice, and any other travelling documents." I went, "What does he do with them?" He says, "We put them in the portal." "What do you do with them?" He said, "We take them out of the portal, print them, and read them." We don't want to be in that world. Not because that world's wrong, but that world doesn't suit Brexit. So we've pitched up mostly for European roll on, roll off, customs clearance on a truck. And customs clearance on a truck is different from customs clearance of a container. I get it, you know, don't be sending me PDFs. You might as well send me a fax. In fact, it's a backward step sending a PDF, because at least the fax printed itself and it saved me the trouble. So what we don't want to do when there's a time when there is a shortage of customs clearance agents, sorry to be so bullish about this, but there's a shortage of customs clearance agents generally. What you don't want to do is have your top guys who are qualified to do customs entry spending 60% of their time reading a piece of paper to try and find the Incoterms. When in Europe, in the European flows, remember we were all friends a couple of years ago, is that there's data. Give me the data. Don't be messing around with scrappy bits of paper. It's that if there's a piece of paper, or the PDF was created, it was created by a bit of data, and it's the data we want. So as much as possible, we want to keep away from PDFs. We've then focused in on XML, because it's the most robust flow for large volume users. And then we focused on Excel, weirdly, because we've written some fancy tools in Excel which really help our process. CSV is in our pack and not our most favored solution, because it's got some issues in how you handle the data. We just don't think it's as robust as XML. It's definitely more robust than Excel. But the process we've written in Excel, known as our RPA sheets, our robotic process automation sheets, allow us to validate the data at the point of input, and therefore we're giving a much cleaner response. If we get time, I'll show you that, but if not, we're going to have them on. We're going to have them on download anyway. But for us, it's easy. Data in, integration tool passes through the master data filter, picks up the missing bits and bobs, and starts to populate the entry. I don't know if you can ever see this very clearly. I've cut some of the screen off so it doesn't show the consignee, consignor information. But this is actually in the very early stages. We got the robot just to do an entry in full-blown training mode almost. So it wasn't accessing directly into data. It was looking up on every case. And we did that just to kind of put the robot through its paces a bit, and thinking, well, if it can do all those lookups, then that should work. And this is one of the robots working, just pulling up a commodity for sample widgets, although it's sheet music, I think, because there's no duty on it. So we always trying to go for something a bit innocuous if we can, particularly when we're trialing these types of things. But that's the entry, just sits there churning away. We've got 40 robots now, all sitting in a cloud somewhere. We never see them. The software's in the cloud as well. So most of this we never see. It just operates in the background. But the main thing that our focus has been on is that one slice of data allows all of the processes to hang off the back. So you only need one piece of data, and then you can do the EAD, the TAD, the XS, the ENS, C88 if that's required, or import entry rather. And you can also do the traces, IPAFs or BCP piece, all from one piece of data. There's no need to be sending a bit here and a bit there. That's actually created a bit of a challenge for us at the moment, is that some people are sending us data and we're trying to do too much with that data, and they're saying, oh, I only wanted the export. I said, well, oh, okay, we've done the ENS in France and everything just as a walkthrough. So we've had to change the RPA data capture recently to include an order form at the back. So we actually say now, look, from this information you've given us, we're going to roll off these documents unless you stop us, and if you stop us, then you need to tell us what you need. Okay, this obviously is all going to be done fast as physically possible, and hence the robotics. So the robotics, though, is mostly for us. There's a lot of people who want to see the robot trials end to end, but I mean that's our side. David, who looks after our robot side, is I don't know where we'd be with that, David, to be fair, but he's been working really, really hard in the background, and we've got good testing going on. But we've got to go global testing. We can't really afford to go individual client testing because we're not going to get anywhere. We're going to spend so long getting an SFTP line hooked up with somebody when we could be actually working out how we're going to handle 1,000 declarations every 2 hours or something, you know. So we're just going to make sure we focus our times correctly. and the other one is the Excel. The Excel we created called this RPA sheet. I don't know whether you've seen it, but if not, we'll circulate it to everybody anyway. We just updated it over the weekend. It's now 99 lines long. It does port validations as you put them in. If it wants a second quantity like a supplementary unit, it tells you what supplementary units you want. But most importantly, because we've done all the validation on the commodity codes, when you put the commodity code in of your product, it will tell you whether or not it requires a supplementary unit. It will tell you whether or not it requires a MRSing code. It will tell you all that we know about that commodity code instantly. Plus, it will tell you whether or not that is a real commodity code. What we've seen already is when people sending us test data, the commodity codes don't exist. Or the classic on food and beverages, it's drop the leading zero. That's a classic. When you're in commodity code 0102, for example, you drop that leading zero and suddenly you're in chapter 10 rather than chapter 1. So it's very important that the data is robust. EORI numbers as well. We get quite a few EORI numbers that are horribly wrong. And I mean, it's not rocket science, but there is a way of checking them. So good data is absolutely vital. If we don't get the data right, then the process, no matter who we are, the process is wrong and it's going to slow us all down. The robotics will fail because the robot's stupid. He's only as clever as we told him to be. And if the data comes in and it's not something, he can't look at the EORI number and go, wow, it's nearly right, that'll do. He doesn't think like that. He's completely ones and zeros, you know, whites and blacks, I was going to say. So good data in, everything's fine. Bad data in, bin it. It's not workable. Whew, we've done 2 hours and 45 minutes of talking about Brexit. I could do this all day, to be fair. I want to show you quickly the data. But I don't think we're going to get time. Weirdly, in 3 hours, I don't think we're going to get time to show you through the RPA sheets. So, but we will mail out about it. We'll put it on LinkedIn and we will send out on MailChimp and on our own sort of distribution lists. We're just re-recording the user guides on them because we've done quite a bit of work to improve some of the piece and to add functions into it. So keep an eye on those. The next sort of 24 hours will be 48 hours rather. We'll be releasing the RPA sheets with more data, with more functionality on them. Really, it was mostly tweaks and things, but the silly things like we've forgotten the seal number on the truck, so we've got that covered off now. We stretched it out to 99 commodity codes now. And we pulled some other bits together to make it a bit more workable. So I won't spend a lot of time now going into the granular detail of that because we're going to record a user guide that will sit over the top of that anyway. There's still the trader version, there's still the logistics version. Our robots know how to read the RPA, so that works pretty well. And equally, what we're getting now is if somebody wants to give us data in a particular way, we're actually converting it to RPA. And in fact, so that we can then email that to the robots. And in fact, our staff in our office don't use customs entry software in a live state. They actually complete the RPA sheet, our own Excel, and email it to our own robot who does the entry. You know, why sit there pouring around with, you know, what's the box 44 code when you've already got it embedded in the system? So rather than do that, I know we can use templates and everything, and you can use templates, you can use worksheets, you can use all kinds of tricks to make entries a bit quicker. That's fine if everything was a phased introduction. But what you've actually got on day one is big bang. Everyone's doing this for the first time, and suddenly, you know, templates are only any good if everybody had a template. And as much as you try and create the templates, it's been a hell of a job getting even an EORI number of some people. So that's the presentation. We did get some questions, and thank you for sticking. Let me just see how many of you stuck with it. Let's test it a minute. Hang on a second. See how many of you stuck with the process. Wow. Well, we didn't lose many. There's still 327 online, which is good. Thank you very much. Let's now go through the questions, which we put an email address out, which was an email address that we don't use much. It was just for port responses. God, now I'm giving it out. It's loaded now. So we will go through the questions that were in there. It will take us a couple of days, but I wanted just to pick some out that were more general and just cover those off. So I've picked out, I think, about 10 or 12 just to cover off what we've got. Let's go for it from the top. He says, and his screen won't move. That's good. Let's try again. So, dun, dun, dun. I think it's about 12 questions. HubSpot's trying to wake me up again for some reason. Click that away. Right, this one comes up quite a bit. Double duty jeopardy if goods are imported to GB and then re-exported. Look, it is what it is. The reason why I've covered that is that it allows me to cover off a piece that often confuses people. Is that at the moment, if you bring something, but bear in mind we're still in the EU, okay? At the moment, if you bring something into GB from United States of America, from US, and you pay the duty, the goods can now move freely around the EU. That's called free circulation. The origin of the product hasn't changed. It's just the duty has been paid. When you come into the EU, it doesn't matter which door you came through, the entrance price is the same. So once you've paid your ticket, you can wander around the park all day long. Okay, so that's what's happening when you're bringing stuff in from, say, America into the EU today. Take us out of that free circulation model, and you've got a problem. Now you bring product into GB from America, and you pay the duty in GB, and then you realise you're going to sell them to a guy in France. Product's still American. Paying the duty did not change the country of origin, and if you've now paid the duty in GB, you've got to pay the duty again in France. So you only wasted one. The waste, well, there's one and a half actually, because you wasted the initial duty payment, and you've increased the cost base of the duty payment in the final destination country, because they'll be basing the duty on your price, not the price that you bought it for wholesale. How do you get around this? Bonded warehouse, temporary storage facilities. Bonded warehouse puts goods into bonded store, so that you don't have to pay the duty until the goods are sold, and you pay the duty on exit. That's very good if you've got high shipping costs, for example, bicycles from Shanghai, for example. Bring in more bicycles than you sold, hold them in storage, and only pay the duty as they leave. So it's a kind of a duty cash flow benefit is bonded warehousing. The other one is temporary storage facility, which has got a 90-day window, which is a kind of process animation, or suspended animation of process. Sorry, you don't know what you're going to do, and you've got 90 days to decide. Within that 90 days, you can either move it into bond, or you can actually handle the documentation in a different way. So the goods have come in, you don't know what to do. They're in a temporary storage facility. They're either going to be diverted to the UK market, or diverted to bond, or they're going to be sold somewhere else. You haven't paid the duty. So the goods have come in from, say, the United States, come into a temporary storage facility. You've now sold them to a guy in France, and they export on a T1 because they've never been cleared in GB. Okay, and the goods are just the duty becomes payable when they arrive in France as American goods. So yes, double duty jeopardy. Get it wrong, and yes, you could end up paying duty twice. Mixed commodity codes in one case. I've had this a couple of times actually from Aldi suppliers, because of course its Aldi model is quite often sort of co-packing within packaging, and we had it as well from Lidl. It's not a problem. It just means you've got to break it down. So generally speaking, we try to go to the highest category of packaging, pallets. If that doesn't work, we come down to cases. If that doesn't work, we come down to individual units. So it's absolutely fine having mixed commodity codes. The commodity codes that are in that truck are just in that truck. It all depends on, we can't obviously say that's one pallet of 2 commodity codes. So we then got to bring it down to a case. And if we can't bring it down to case, then we bring it down to items. But it's absolutely fine. Commodity code is a commodity code. The package's weight and value are just unique to that commodity code in that vehicle. And the units have to just be broken down to the lowest point they can be, i.e. cases. Do CCC, that's us, by the way, Customs Clearance Consortium, have badges for all of the ports and airports? Yes, my God, we do. I didn't think we'd need them, in that most of it is non-inventory linked, and certainly entry in declarants records is non-inventory linked. And then Tyler joined the team, and we got them everywhere now, which has been the right thing to do. But boy, he works fast. So suddenly we've got approvals everywhere you think. We've got CNS, MCP. In fact, we haven't got Dover, to be fair. And only because we can't see a situation where clearances will take place at Dover, because there's no need for them to do that. The only clearances that take place at Dover, I think, you know, in a Brexit environment, would be the ones that are taking place at Dover today. And as I was saying, we're not setting up to take business off customs clearance agents, who are my friends and colleagues. I hope they're my friends. We're setting up to take some of the strain of the additional customs clearance created by Brexit. So with that case in mind, I don't really need to clear in Dover for Swiss and Turkish goods, because that already is cleared in Dover by very capable and amiable agents in that area. So, but yeah, otherwise, yes, we've got everywhere. Hull, Felixstowe, Liverpool, Belfast, you name it, we've got a badge there. Will TSS be ready? I typed that originally because it was a question, and then I thought underneath, well, hang on a minute, it's the same as everybody else. Will GVMS be ready? Will PBN be ready? And at the same time, I clicked on SI Brexit just yesterday, actually, just thinking, oh, I'll have a quick look at that, see how that's looking. It's crashed, or it's been taken offline. So is that ready? I don't know. I just know it's not accessible anymore. I'm getting just a web failure on it. TSS will be ready. It has to be ready, because the part of the Northern Ireland Protocol, well, the large chunk of the Northern Ireland Protocol is that we must respect the agreements that are in that, including the fact that it's in the EU Customs Code. So yes, it will be ready. The ENS portal function has been tested at pace and under stress, and it's holding up very well. I have to say, what we've achieved, I mean, we came into this in September, I think, and what's been achieved in those September, October, November, just it's not 4 months max. It's been immense, and that was including the actual proposal to be considered as a partner for this within this project. So it is not for the one to try, and if it's not ready. GVMS, is that ready? Not really. Some of it. It's ready where it needs to be. So it's ready on transit. You have to prioritize these things, and we've spent the last sort of 6 months talking about managing your expectations, and it's not all going to be ready on day one. So GVMS is ready where it needs to be ready, which is the Office of Transit function and the Northern Ireland flows. So no, it's not going to be ready on day one, but it is where it needs to be. Is PBN going to be ready? Yes, I think it is. The Irish Revenue are doing a great job. We did some trials on it a while ago, and we were still in test mode, but it's nice, clean and simple. Yeah, no, done a good job. It looks good. SI Brexit's fallen over. Not fallen over, I think it's been taken offline, to be fair. RxC port's already up and running. Port base is how it works. So there's nothing to do there. We just plug more of it in. Loading before EU exit, delivering afterwards. Look, there's nothing official on this yet, but in the original kind of no deal crash outs, there was quite a lot of an overlap model written. And that actually said that there was kind of a 5-day window. Doesn't seem enough, but it's better than nothing. It's assumed that would be the case again. So if you load pre-Brexit and you deliver afterwards, you'd have 5 days to complete that cycle. But that's not official, but it's certainly what happened before. What is required for empty packaging? Depends who you ask, really. The problem is UK are saying, oh, we don't need anything for empty packaging, and EU are saying, oh, hang on a minute, we do. So I think last I heard actually in Holland was on certain trays going back to Holland was that a verbal entry was required. It's an interesting one. You're literally just ringing up customs going, yep, this truck has empty trays in it. I think the long and the short of it is that, you know, the practicalities say it shouldn't be required. The reality says, do you want to chance it? I would say you do an export declaration and you do an import declaration for return goods or so on and so forth. But I wouldn't try on day one having nothing at all unless there is a deal and there is some relaxation. Just a bit of belt and braces here. Just don't try and be clever. Just, you know, if you think you need it, do it, because you never know. A lot of this is new rules. Well, not new rules, but new people being exposed to rules for the first time. So it's going to come down to interpretation. So the worst thing you can do is try and be a bit clever, a bit cute. Do we need a frontier declaration in GB? I think I've covered that a million times now. Yeah, you can have one if you want one. It's one of those where it, aside from inventory link ports, there's nowhere to put it. I'm still not 100% clear on some of the inventory link ports, in that just because a port is inventory linked doesn't mean that particular berth is inventory linked. And a lot of the times the row berths are not inventory linked, even though the container terminal element of the port might be. I did get a list from customs, but it was so ambiguous that I'm none the wiser. So I think in the end we're just going to ask our friends at the CSPs of like Penton, MCP, CNS, and not so much CCS UK because it tends to be more airports, but we're just going to get their view on it. If we need to do a frontier declaration of some sort to lift it off the inventory and get it out of the port, that will be done. We just don't yet know what shape that looks like, but it's not a showstopper in any piece. Yeah. What paperwork goes with the driver? We still get asked this. Buy the book, commercial invoice, packing list, transit document, health certificate. The last two are optional. The commercial invoice should be can be a pro forma invoice for customs purposes if you're dealing with DDP and so on and so forth, but otherwise should be a commercial invoice. And a packing list is very, very similar to a commercial invoice, but work on the basis of a packing list that if you were a customs officer and you wanted to look for item number 17, would you know what it looked like? You know, could you identify it? So the packing list is actually a sort of an aid for examinations or physical examinations more than anything else. What's required for Tracy's NT? Latin names in a lot of cases. Really struggling with Latin names, and we did a bit of it. We dropped the ball a little bit a while ago as we sent out a mail shot saying please give us the Latin names for all of your products. But we sent it to just about everybody, which was a bit, we dropped the ball on that one. And plus we were asking somebody about their products of animal origin, but they weren't importing products of animal origin. Anyway, the traces is that we require the exporter, the importer, the border control post, who's responsible for the load, so on and so forth. It's a more complicated entry than you might think. Can an EU company have a GB deferment account? Yes, you can. That was told to me a while ago by customs. So yes, a GB import, an EU company can have a GB deferment account if they're an importer. I'm pretty sure it'll have to be on a GB bank, but they have said there's nothing stopping you having one. Okay, even if you're a non-established taxable person. How does the vehicle leave the GB port? On the whole, it'd be more a case of them. Like if it's a non-inventory port, so it's not got any inventory controls at the port, the vehicle will be passing straight through. If it's got inventory control, then you might need to put an inventory entry to lift it off the inventory and to allow it to pass through the gate. Last but not least, I don't know why I've stopped on 12 good men and all that. Who's in our team? It's just me, really. It's just all that recording of noise in the background. There's 62 of us now. There were, as we pointed out the other day, at the beginning of September, there were 4 of us. And there's now 62. So this is why we go a bit quiet sometimes. We're training like nothing. We've got 5 offices now within the Innovation Centre that we're in, and an office in Kent. We spent a small fortune on cloud-based processes, and an even bigger fortune on robotics. So it's gone very high, very fast. Hence the reason why we're concentrating really on sort of Brexit style entries, because we can train somebody to do a Brexit style entry in a day. But if we wanted them to do sit there and be able to do bicycles from Shanghai or peanuts from America, that's going to take a couple of years, you know, and we're not in that space. We're in the kind of the Spice Girls of music. So we're the Spice Girls of customs clearance. I don't know where that analogy came from. It's the end of the day. I'm upset with the end of this anyway. But we have recently put online, we will put an escalation list out there. So if there's any problems, who do I contact? But we recently put on our website under the About Us section, our team and some avatars of who they are, not what they look like, because that was always contentious, but at least you get an idea of who they are and roughly what they do, so that you can, if you want to talk about European agents, you can have a chat with Elaine. If you want to talk about keeping things going, you need to speak to Jessica, and so on and so forth. So it's all on there now. Good, well done. You've survived. That's the end of the questions. I'll just click it onto the last one. Well, there are more, but as I said, we'll pick up the other ones from the emails into so please stop now, otherwise you won't get any time to answer them. I hope that's been useful, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.